Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where until Monday, August the 23rd at 10:59 a.m. Eastern, we have a weekly sale for you. And what a week it is, because Standard is finally rotating in another 4 weeks. But it's soon. Renewable Drain is leaving, so no more Bonecrusher Giant, no more Lovestruck Beast, unless you want them for something else, because this sale gives you 20% off everything that's leaving Standard, so not just Renewable Drain, but Theros Beyond Death, Ikoria, and M21, as well as 10% off everything that's still in Standard, so that's Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, and Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So, if you've been waiting to pick up that copy of the Great Henge, that's even cheaper now. And if you want the cards that are still here but haven't had a chance to shine yet during Thrinavol Drain's Reign of Terror, you can get those too over at StarCityGames.com/sale. Once again, that's StarCityGames.com/sale.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. If you're inventive people, you'll find a way to make it work. So, take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey. I'm here with Ari Lax, and this episode is being billed as the MH2 exit interview episode, but I fear that may be false advertising. I get the feeling a lot of these cards are here to stay.
Yeah, I struggle to believe that something would have to go horribly wrong for the next year to have even a fraction of the impact of this set. We would need, like, Throne of Eldraine 2.
Yeah, it is possible that we wake up one day and we're back in mid-2019 and the entire past, 2.5 years of Magic and everything else have been one long fever dream. And honestly, I might take that mulligan at this point. But for now, this is the world we live in, and we'll be dissecting MH2's impact on the format now that we've had some time to see that, make itself known, and to digest that as our main topic here. But before we do that, we have a lot of results to get to here. So to take a peek behind the curtain, we're actually recording this opening segment last on the Monday here before we are published, because we had, I think, 5 different meaningful tournaments by my count over the weekend, and we wanted to make sure we had all of the results in for those and are able to put those in some kind of holistic perspective here.
Yeah, and it's not just like, it's 5 tournaments across like a variety of scales and mediums. It's probably like the first really classic kind of weekend data dump that we've had, something matching back to what you see in like 2016, where you have like an open and a classic and a Magic Online event and like a PTQ, like it's everything. We have everything.
And so to go into the details there, on top of the usual Saturday and Sunday challenges, which we should not overlook because there are some interesting storylines developing in those that we want to unpack, we also have the Showcase Playoff on the Saturday. We have a Super Qualifier on the Sunday. Not quite sure what it's qualifying for or how super that's going to be, but the event happened, so we will analyze it. And then across the weekend, we have the Burton Memorial Open. So this is an annual event that takes place down in Texas to raise money for suicide prevention. And for our purposes here, this is the biggest live modern event that we've had, I'm going to say, in at least the past 18 months.
Yeah, I actually didn't check the full size of the event, but it was at least a couple hundred people is what it looks like.
Yeah, and so this is our glimpse at what Paper Magic is going to look like as it slowly returns. And it might be interesting as we get more of those results. I don't know if this one data point is going to be enough, but to see if and how the live metagame, wherever that happens to take place, contrast with the online metagame, if there are certain biases in play or certain unique information cascades taking place in one medium versus another.
I actually just checked the numbers, and it looks like there are 480 some deck lists here.
Which is a pretty nice turnout, especially when I know coming into this period of time, there were some questions over, is Paper Magic going to be permanently scarred by this? And I'm sure there are people who were playing avidly before who are not going to make the transition back to that now. But as an early omen of things to come, this is a promising sign, I would argue.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away too much of the content that we've already recorded or like you'll listen to later, but I think that a lot has happened over the last 2 weeks to make me feel a lot less pessimistic about any kind of weird crunches the format might experience as a result of any transition back to paper play.
Yeah, and this is an event which is correctly gated by having strict safety standards in place, and so the trade-off there is you're going to get people who might be padding the numbers otherwise who don't, for whatever reason, don't want to sign up to that. But it's good to see that an event like this can still happen and still flourish, even when it's adopting best practices in terms of holding this kind of event in the first place.
Yeah, safety first.
Absolutely. And for us, it's going to be the Saturday challenge first. So let's dive into these results here. And the big headline story here, Ari, is Guillaume Raffetapper completing his epic quest through Magic's Color Pie. We started with Esper a few months ago before MH2. We then zigzagged around. We went to Jeskai and then to Bant recently with some Eternal Witness Ephemerate action in a control deck. And now he's going back to his roots with just classic, good old blue-white control. But his one companion throughout that entire quest had to be abandoned for all of this to be possible.
Which companion are we discussing?
Not any of the nonsense ones within the Magic universe. Using it in the proverbial sense here to refer to, of course, the one copy of Timeless Dragon, which not so timeless as it turns out here.
Oh, I was wondering if we were referring to Mr. Cafulet. If I believe I saw I'd have to look up the deck list, but I thought I saw a Bant finish still from them. But a lot of discarding along the way.
I believe the two of them are still very much partners in crime. And actually, maybe we've been framing this relationship incorrectly the whole time. I think it may be Mr. Cathuret, who is the Timeless Dragon sympathizer, and maybe Raffetapper, was never really along for that ride.
Yeah, I do appreciate that we're still just playing a bunch of one-of-nonsense creatures, though. It's like, yeah, Timeless Dragon doesn't deserve a slot, but that one Wall of Omens is a weight-bearing Wall of Omens. Yeah,
we got the one Wall of Omens, the one Spreading Seas, and as it turns out, this is not the only result, spoiler alert, that Raffetapper will be posting on this weekend with this deck. And so it's fun to see when that happens. Once you have one tournament under your belt, one good finish with that exact configuration, do you just run it back or do you make some minor changes? And trying to read the tea leaves with those changes can be an interesting exercise sometimes.
Yeah, I would definitely qualify some of these changes between the deck lists that have been posted for WAFO as tea leaves, especially in the sideboard, because we'll get to that.
Well, yes, more of that in a little bit. But for the more mundane results in the Saturday challenge, not to take anything away from them, of course, we mostly have more of the same. We've got some elementals still showing up, Canister making the top 8 here once again, as well as essentially a carbon copy of Canister's list in the hands of the one and only Wambo Combo 2020. And then friend of the show, Devin O'Donnell here with Team of Footfalls. And we have more Cascade representation, not just here with Living End in the top 8, more Footfalls, and Living End going through this top 32. But the Cascade decks across the weekend and across the board posted excellent finishes. And so I think one of the big picture takeaways here is these Cascade decks, even though there is a range of colorless options in the format for hating those out, so to speak, that effectively any deck can play, those both Footfalls and Living End have proven to be resilient enough to handle that adversity.
Yeah, I also think that some of the swing back to sort of more classic modern decks has brought Force of Negation back to being one of the more important cards, or, well, I don't want to say important, but one of the better options to have access to, and the basically only good way to play Force of Negation almost is to play these decks. Like, it's the freest in them for sure.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And more broadly, I think just being a good deck for supporting the pitch card, so not just Force of Negation, but Force of Vigor. And in the Footfalls decks, you have a bunch of like Furies and Endurances across the 75. That really covers your ground against basically anything you might come across. And so those cards let you interact with the top of the range for whatever your opponent is doing. And then once you can reduce it to a fair fight, making 10 power on turn 3 with a single card, or whatever amount of power you're putting into play with Living End, that's usually going to win the fair fight once it becomes that.
Yeah. Turning towards a bit more of a fair deck fighting a fair fight, can we talk about the exact contents of this second place deck list? It's the Indomitable Creativity deck, but it's kind of dead center in the middle of the two options. It literally has a Velomachus and an Emrakul, but it's doing something kind of interesting that I like, which is it's not playing the extra Time Warps beyond Time Warp, but it is still playing Time Warp. And I'm a pretty big fan of that because I think that Time Warp plus Wrenn and 6 by itself is just like a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, and this deck even has Nahiri the Harbinger as well. So you can play Nahiri, tick it up to 6, next turn, tick it up to 8, and Time Warp, and then next turn, minus Nahiri, get the Emrakul, get the Velomachus to officially go off there. And yeah, that was always the takeaway from the early iterations of the Velomachus deck for me, which is Time Warp is just a good magic card, and if you can find an excuse to put that in your deck, then that's a big selling point. Save for the moment, it is not. And so maybe you do get to split the difference here. That being said, there will be times with this setup where you really want to hit the Emrakul and not the Velomachus, or vice versa, and the other one isn't going to be good enough, and you don't really have any control over which one that's going to be. And then also, with the Velomachus, there is a reason that people were playing Save at the moment, and it's because you need to immediately convert the Velomachus trigger into something meaningful, and sometimes that can be Prismari Command or Lightning Bolt, right? Sometimes that minimal form of interaction or Prismari Command, maybe that's going to be enough. But for the most part, you really want to be hitting Time Warp, and slashing your odds of that in half does leave you exposed when you need to high roll there and you miss.
Yeah, I'm a little higher on Saber than I think you are. I think that it's close enough to like an Explorer Growth Spiral that I've been okay with playing it. But I also don't know if you, even with Sabers, have an actual density of things to hit with Velomachus. I mean, I've said this a couple times on the pod, I think, before, where my experience with this deck is nothing like the historic version, where that version you would like Velomachus, and then if you took a Time Warp turn, it was just over because you can like convert that Time Warp turn into something good. But with this list, my experience has been that if you don't control a Teferi, often if you like hit a Time Warp turn and then not the second, or Teferi, I mean any Planeswalker, but like you hit the first Time Warp turn, and then if your second one bricks, you're often like, well, I dealt like 10, 13 damage, but that's not enough to one-shot someone, and like your other cards aren't providing a ton of big value. There's not, the Mizzix Mastery backup plan or something. You're not just doing anything. It's really a lot of this deck's game plan is funneled directly through either creativity or ultimating Wrenn and 6. And like, I think that it's kind of a hard ass to say like, well, I'm going to creativity into my Velomachus and control a Wrenn and 6 and hit a Time Warp. And all of this together is what locks up the kill. It's kind of like you have this stretch goal of maybe going off, but like if you fail, you've like done a bit, but it's not going to full recover a game.
Yeah, so one interesting development on that front actually comes from the Sunday Challenge, where Mr. Rabe, who was one of the pioneers of the Velomachus version and had stuck with that configuration even when other people were trying the Emrakul instead and so on, they actually notched up a 4th place finish here with their mix being an Emrakul and a Serra's Emissary in the main deck, where that card is lights out against Hammer Time specifically, certainly pre-sideboard and often post as well, where maybe they have 2 Path to Exile or something in their 75, if that, and they're effectively just drawing to those outs at this point. And then there are other decks as well, like some configurations of the Elementals decks, for example, or some of the other more linear decks in the format where Serra's Emissary is effectively unbeatable, and that is the most reliable target. That being said, when that card is bad, it's often just easily swatted away by Teferi Time Raveler, Path of Exile, whatever it is. And so you end up in the same situation of almost forcing yourself to hit the right color on the roulette wheel, where it's, all right, well, if I hit Emrakul, I'm good to go, or Emissary, or vice versa. And then the other part of that 50-50 shot comes up short. In the sideboard, though, the third creature that they have in the mix is an Iona Shield of Emeria, which is one that we really haven't seen in a while. But I guess maybe the theory there is the matchups where Emissary is bad are likely to be the ones where Iona itself is lights out in a different way, and so you can kind of switch it up and still have the Emrakul there as a reliable hit.
Maybe I kind of wonder if the shift is to have, like, one of the experiences I had with this deck was that it's really bad in Teferi mirrors, at least with the Emrakul, just because, like, that just doesn't, like, if they have a Teferi, you can't go off into it, and you don't have a lot of great ways to attack the Teferi. Like, you have, your 4 prismatic endings, but if they just manage the loyalty on it, it's kind of hard to get anywhere. So maybe you're just, like, swapping to threats that like, Iona on blue, probably pretty good in those matchups. Like, the white cards don't really answer Iona when you're playing against these control decks, so maybe that, like, it's kind of this weird backup version of Emissary that lets you, like, maybe Emissary's bad against some combo deck, you can board into, like, Iona Emrakul and have flex that way. Like, it kind of, the packages you can create are uniquely good in a lot of angles. It's kind of weird. I don't know.
Yeah, I was racking my brain trying to come up with a creativity hit that's good against an on-board Teferi, and really came up short there, where technically Velomachus can do that sometimes, but the issue there is when you attack with the Velomachus, the Teferi voids the attack trigger, and so sometimes you get to kill the Teferi, but then they either untap and play another one, or if they can answer back with something of their own, then you're in a bad spot there. And the best I could find was Inkwell Leviathan against the Teferi decks, but then that comes with its own vulnerabilities, and some of the Teferi decks are trying to do something ridiculous or go over the top themselves, and Leviathan doesn't actually race that all too effectively. So if you can find that option, I think that's a useful thing to have in the arsenal. I just don't know exactly what that would look like yet.
Maybe something along the lines, maybe you just want Archon. Like, Archon of Cruelty is just a really good card, right?
Yeah, it is. So I have been messing around with Reanimator a lot recently, and so much of that deck's equity in a given matchup is tied up in how good is just one Archon coming into play, and especially if you had to sink a bunch of resources into that to get it there. And the answer varies quite a lot in my experience. So that is still a limiting factor, I think. But rounding out this Saturday challenge here, like I said, got some elementals. We have Yawgmoth reappearing in the top 8 here, a 7-0 run throughout the Swiss by Lord of Puntlantis, but falling short, sadly, in the quarterfinals. And the big addition here that we touched on briefly, I guess just one copy here of Prosperous Innkeeper as a way to unlock that Essence Warden upside, but also it's a thing that you can Eldritch Evolution into Yawgmoth, the life gain, and having the treasure not tied to the creature itself means, you can ramp up to either hardcasting Yawgmoth or whatever it is, sometimes just mana fixing for your Grass Messenger too, without needing the body itself to stick around. So a minor upgrade there, but I think a pretty important one. And then looking down the rest of this, one of the stories that jumps out when you just look at the top 8 is, okay, well, there's no Hammer here, there's no Is It Murktide? And then you look down the top 16, top 32, and it's basically just those 2 decks for the most part.
Yeah, I really think that, people were hyping this as like, oh, look, it's different, like that those decks are rotating out. It's like, no, this is just like a bit of variance in a wide metagame,
Yeah.
I really, if you look at the rest of the results for this weekend, there's a lot of Urza Saga, there's a lot of Ragavan still winning.
Yeah, when I floated the idea of just banning Lurrus from Modern, a few people hopped into my mentions to be like, well, the Saturday Challenge top 8 had 0 copies of Lurrus in there, and you're suggesting to ban it. And it's like, well, okay, well, let's stick with this weekend. Let's look at the Sunday Challenge results, all the Memorial Open results, all the PTQ results, and so on and so forth. And all of those tell a very different story. So just using one data set is not going to give you the full picture there. And so with that in mind, let's jump ahead to the Sunday Modern Challenge, which in terms of the timing, this began a few hours before the PTQ. And so I don't know if people were trying to either like finalize their choices for the PTQ, or maybe if you have two decks on the docket which you're deciding between. You maybe play the more speculative one in this and then see how you start out, and then maybe that informs your decision for the PTQ itself. I don't know if that's really a big part of the equation, but an unexpected deck taking first place here in the hands of European Pro, former Platinum Pro on and off, Emmanuel Gerstensen. This is Jeska-Erza, and I was able to do well with a similar deck a few weeks ago, and it's been popping up here and there, but this is a much more committed version of that archetype, I'll say, where aside from the 3 copies of Prismatic Ending, kind of a split here between that and Portable Hole, every other card in the deck is either an artifact or a card that interacts with artifacts in some way. So in terms of a artifact-centric Urza strategy that we've alluded to on and off over the past few weeks, this is it. I think this is what we maybe had in mind.
Yes, the Antiquities theme deck. Yeah, this is all the stuff you would expect to see. The one thing I might note is that there's like a very slight splash off Glimmer Void for like Nihil Spellbomb and some other like off-color activations. But yeah, it's about all the Jeskai cards you would expect to see. I think that the one notable thing is that you had Counterspell, correct? And this flipped to like Flusterstorm in a similar spot. I think that just has to do with specifically targeting the Cascade decks when you're trying to go after spells.
Yeah, and especially when a lot of those decks also have stuff like Force of Vigor, where Flusterstorm is a nice countermeasure against that. So this doesn't have access to tools like Teferi Time Raveler in the main deck or stuff like Supreme Verdict. This is much more focused and on plan, and so this version is going to be assembling stuff like the Thought to Sword combo that much more consistently, or if this is a matchup where the one Ensnaring Bridge, for example, or even the one Elixir of Immortality that's found its way into the main deck, you have, so taking that one as an example, you've got the copy itself, but also 4 Urza Saga, 4 Goblin Engineer, 3 Whir of Invention that can all find that card. And so if you need that, or the Pithing Needle, or the Ether Spellbomb, you can actually find that with remarkable consistency in a lot of your games here. One thing which I thought was going on at first, but actually is a much smaller part of this, but hey, I'm midstream here, so I'm going to finish the thought, is we have Glimmervoid and Spire of Industry, and specifically Glimmervoid has always been a fairly high-risk, high-reward card in the sense that sometimes you're forced to keep a low-resource hand where you go Glimmervoid into an artifact, and if your opponent can remove that one artifact, then they get it all, and you're really fighting an uphill battle from there. But the artifact lands from MH2, which have Indestructible, make that a lot easier to, cross your fingers and hope with. That being said, you can't play too many of those, and there's in fact only one copy of Silver Bluff Bridge, the Izzet land, in this deck. So that's not as much of a dimension as I was assuming at first, but something to keep in mind if you're building a deck like this in the future.
Yeah, though there's kind of this flip side issue of like, your opening hand contains 2 lands, they're Glimmervoid, Urza Saga, good luck. Like, that's not great.
Yeah, it does mess up your sequencing quite a bit. But interesting to see this deck doing so well. In a world of Cascade continuing its dominance, I kind of would like to see that one main deck copy of like a Chalice of the Void, or we have an Aethersworn Canonist in the sideboard here. Some, an effect like that, just to have access to that effect in game ones. But otherwise, great to see this deck doing well. Nice that a more linear version of this that isn't paying as much respect to what other people are doing can succeed as well. And that's really the most interesting result from this top 8 here. But outside the top 8, just lurking beneath there, we have some far more interesting results, sorry.
Yeah, I believe it was this event. Maybe not this event. Okay, continue on with your interesting results, because I do love the 9th place deck from this event. I think this might be the place that Ingenious Smith is actually going to do good work.
You don't think the 10th place deck list is more refined and piloted by a more handsome individual?
We've seen this stuff. I've seen actually, so Hardened Scales in 9th and 10th here. And I've seen a lot of this. The 9th place list is moving towards a white splash as opposed to you in 10th place. I guess you have white splash as well.
Yeah, my white splash is for one of the 2 modes on Zabaz, and then theoretically being able to cast Lurrus from my sideboard, although how often I was actually able to do that, that's another question. But yeah, as you mentioned, this ninth place list, this is definitively green-white hardened scales. This is an actual white commitment here. And some lists I've seen have taken this even further for stuff like Esper Sentinel as an additional one drop in the main deck. This one has Arcbound Javelineer instead. And there's even the Arcbound Mouser as an option too, if you want that, although this list didn't quite go that far. But yeah, as you alluded to, Ingenious Smith joining the roster here, and we've seen that compete for space in the Hammer decks as a 2-drop there, although it has to compete with Pure Steel Paladin and Stoneforge Mystic, which are locked in, and then there aren't that many additional 2-drops, so you can talk yourself into playing on top of that. Whereas in this deck, you are glutted on those to some extent. You know, you have Ravager and then Hangabout Walker and Walking Ballista, which often are going to be 2-drops, but Ingenious Smith has a much broader range of like good cards that it can find here as well.
Yeah, I kind of view it more as like an Ancient Stirrings that has an effect beyond being Ancient Stirrings here. And I do want to point out that like that shifting from green to white has kind of impacted a lot of the mana-based decisions here. Like there's literally Idyllic range in this deck instead of like Llanowar Reborn or Power Depot. The one other aspect I want to point out with this 9th place list is I really like the Witch's Oven Defined with Urza Saga.
Yeah, that was something that I had an interest in too early on. I ended up leaning more on being able to activate the red ability of Zabaz when you need that artifact sacrifice effect, but I think the Witch's Oven definitely is worth exploring. And to frame this more accurately, this list by MTG Bullent in 9th, this is, if anything, a white Hardened Scales deck smashing green for Hardened Scales, right? Like if you look at the main deck, there's a higher quantity of white cards, and that's reflected in the mana base. And then in the sideboard, you've got Prismatic Ending, Path to Exile. So, you know, Hardened Scales aside, like if that was a white card, you could effectively have a mono white deck on your hands there.
Yeah, I think that this list does sacrifice a little bit when it comes to the mana, though. Just like there's a little bit less, you know, there's Nexus and Saga, but like I think maybe you might want Horizon Canopy over what this is doing with the mana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of the Saga targets, which are worth touching on quickly, we have not a Shadow Spear here, but a Basilisk Scholar. And so this is a card that grants Lifelink and Death Touch. And so in conjunction with Walking Ballista, you can now mow down everything in sight. And also the Javelineer too. If you suit up the Javelineer with that, it becomes very difficult for the opponent to ever enter combat again. So that's an interesting find that we see there. But as for why I picked up this deck again, firstly, it's just a ton of fun, and I kind of wanted to try it and see how well it held up. But I saw a tweet from Sodek, you know, modern expert, combo enthusiast, asking, under what circumstances would the Scales deck be a better choice than Hammer? And the answer that I came up with, which we kind of alluded to last week as well, was either you think that the colorless hate cards are so important that having Stirrings, or I guess having Ingenious Smith in the above list, gives you added consistency for that, or that Walking Ballista is very good. And I guess the Javelineers are kind of a nod to that too, in the same vein. The third reason that a friend chimed in with was, if you think the format is going to be a lot of like Colligan's commands and these Grixis or Mardu decks, these like super grindy strategies, Scales actually holds up a little better there, because if you compare Scales to the Hammer decks, the Hammer decks have better nut draws, and I would say their average draw probably is more powerful, but they can also get bogged down with a bunch of Ornithopters and Mendknights that aren't really doing anything. And so even though in Scales, you still need all of your cards to work together in some way, and this is where, you know, what one of the common fail cases of Scales is you have a hand that has like your hate card for the matchup, but the hate card doesn't really contribute to your main plan, and then you're left with a bunch of Arcbound Workers or whatever that aren't doing anything, and they have the time they need to get out of it. Despite all of that, I would say the median card in the Scales deck is doing more for you than the median card in the Hammer deck, and that's important when your opponent has the tools to surgically pick apart your draw and deprive you of whatever cards they choose.
Yeah, and not just like individually better, they're just independently better. There's a lot less, I need a hammer and I need a thing to put the hammer on my thing, and like if I have like 3 Pure Steel Paladins and no hammer, it's a disaster or whatever. That doesn't happen. It's like, well, I have a bunch of Ravagers, whatever, who cares? They're all good cards.
Yeah, and throughout my tournament, I face 2 copies of the dress down Grixis Shadow deck by Aspiring Spike that we'll touch on in terms of his own finish this weekend in a little bit, and then also one of these incredibly removal heavy Mardu decks. And those matchups, you still had a lot to slog through, but that felt a lot easier than I imagine it would with a draw of comparable quality from the Hammer deck, to put it that way.
Yeah, you are not leaning on a lot of things to go right. You're just kind of playing your cards through and hoping things don't go horrifically wrong. Touching briefly on Hammer, I did find the thing I thought I had seen earlier, and that was 26th place in this event, but it's showing up in another event, I believe, recently. And that is Magnetic Theft in the Hammer decks. I know we had joked about it in the Is It deck, but it's actually just making its way into the Hammer deck because it's doing the Hammer thing, but also just breaking the mirror. This is the red instant attach an equipment to a creature. So you can, yank their hammer out from a Sigarda's aid, but also it's just a way to put your hammer on a thing.
Yeah, you saw people joke and then actually do it when it comes to putting a Manriki Gusari in their deck for the mirrors, which is, I guess, a mirror breaker in the sense that you're shattering all of their equipment. This is by far the best possible card, and nothing else even comes close in terms of its impact on the mirror. So if you expect a lot of that, and I think from the results this weekend, you still should expect a decent amount of that, then that is the splash that you want there. Going back to Yawgmoth for a second, in 12th place in this challenge, Predicted is playing a Yawgmoth deck with Ether Vial. So this one thing this does is it alleviates some of the pressure on the mana base, right? Where going Strangler Geist into Grass Messenger, even with the help of a Twilight Mile or whatever, can be easier said than done sometimes, and this just gets you there. But also, these decks often have the issue where you have to run a bunch of mana acceleration so that you can jump up the curve to your Yawgmoth or to the thing that finds your Yawgmoth. But then, if those are under attack in any way, you're still faced with the issue of you're a 21 land deck, and so getting out there is difficult. And Ether Vial just kind of gets you around that entire dynamic. It takes some time to do that, so in a racing situation, it's not what you need. But if you are against one of these your removal heavy decks, or now that Rafa Tapper has had such a great weekend, I imagine the card Counterspell will be showing up a lot more often, and that's a great time to be busting out Ether Vial again.
Yeah, I also just like it because it's harder to interact with Ether Vial, and I think one of the issues with some of the prior Yawgmoth lists is that you can kind of get your initial setup stuff picked apart and then not deploy in any reasonable time frame and just be playing a clunky pile. And I think Ether Vial helps a little bit there, as opposed to being all the ignoble hierarchs you can imagine. Though there's also a lot of Gilded Gooses here, so
a lot of Gilded Geese and a lot of random stuff filling this out. So we have the Ivy Lane Denizen and Scario combo that we spoke about on an earlier episode, and also a main deck Night of Autumn, which between Court of Calling and Eldritch Evolution, you have a decent amount of access to that. And I guess Grist goes quite nicely with Ether Vial as well in games where that comes up. So an interesting take on that archetype to be aware of here. And then scrolling down the rest of these lists, nothing too interesting really standing out here. You could argue the return of Tron in and of itself is interesting, but that's part of this larger trend that we've identified over the past week or two. I guess the Obosh red deck by definition is just somewhat interesting and out of left field, but within that umbrella, it's stock, if that means anything. Anything else here stand out to you?
Well, the Obosh deck does have a Adventures in the Forgotten Realms card in the sideboard, so we'll just add one more to that set's small total.
Oh, Meteor Swarm, geez. So this is X triple red. It deals 8 damage divided as you choose it among 8 target creatures and or planeswalkers.
X target. Oh. It's not as good as you think it is.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah. I guess if Unholy Heat is not big enough for some reason, then we bust out the Meteor Swarms.
Well, I mean, Murktide Regent does cap at 8 conveniently.
Yeah, paying for mana to kill that thing is okay. Well, I mean, it's on the table. We can do that for sure. I guess just below that we have not a 4-color elemental deck, a true 5-color elemental deck. So this is taking a page out of some of the earlier lists, this is 4 Grief, 4 Lightning Skelemental, and then 2 Hall of Notions, which very conveniently pitches to literally everything. So Solitude, Fury, Grief, Endurance. There's no Subtlety here that I can see, but sure, it can pitch to that one too. And then sometimes this is the perfect thing to sink all of your Omnath mana into, if it comes to that.
Yeah, I do think that with the success of the Thunderkin Awakener version of this deck recently, it might be worth re-examining some of these sort of more dated shells of elementals to see, just make sure there wasn't an information cascade in the wrong way. So it's good to see that people are doing that.
Yeah, notably, this list doesn't have any Flamekin Harbingers, so no attempt to set up specific elementals to Ephemerate, or so we have the 1 Endurance in the main deck, but that's just the 1 Endurance, right? And sometimes you draw that and sometimes you don't, but there's no attempt to stack the deck in terms of finding that when you need to.
Yeah, I really feel like you probably want some of those over like a couple Skelementals or Smoke Braiders or whatever, but pretty marginal changes on the whole.
Yeah, and more on elementals to come in just a second. Rounding out this top 32, I think that's going to do it there. So let's jump over here to... Oh, wait. Okay, so Mark Tobias here, rounding out the top 32 with... this looks like just blue-white Urza, I suppose. And this, in contrast to the Gershenson list, this is a lot more interactive. So we have 4 Teferi in the main deck, 4 Metallic Rebuke, which is a great card if you have enough cheap artifacts to pair with it. And then 4 Talisman of Progress to jump up to our Urzas a turn ahead of schedule. And then, Flusterstorm, Prismatic Ending, and so on in the sideboard, along with a whole lot of one-offs to be fetching up with our Urza Sagas and Whir of Inventions.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple ways to build that deck, and I think that, there's a lot less Shadow Storms than there were a few weeks ago, so it's time to start seeing some of those, but I'm skeptical that playing a 4-mana spell, like Urza costs 4, like it actually costs 4, and that's kind of not what the format's about right now.
Yeah. Let's touch on the showcase playoffs. So we've spoken about the showcase challengers or qualifiers in the past, whatever their official title is. And so these are the big open events which accept qualifier points. So you need to earn those via playing in prelims or leagues over the course of a season. And then usually these are kind of 8 or 9 round events, like fairly large in terms of events that happen on Magic Online. And the top 8 of those over the course of a season each feed into this event, the showcase playoff, where it's incredibly top heavy in the sense that the winner gets an invite to the next Pro Tour equivalent event and to the mocks, crucially, where the minimum prize is several thousand dollars. And so there's a lot on the line here, a lot of money and glory at stake. And as is the case in these small exclusive events where who's going to be playing for the most part, there's a lot of metagaming that takes place and a lot of hard reads, people playing decks or cards that they might not normally. So take all of that with a grain of salt. However, one thing that has remained constant is we mentioned the winner of the last showcase qualifier was Dirk playing an off-the-wall list of five color elementals, and the winner here was Dirk playing an off-the-wall list of 5 color elementals.
Yeah, great job to them for the back-to-back finishes. There's another multiple time finisher, I believe the Burn player that made the top 8 of this, Oddly Uneven is the player's name, is that correct? Was also recently spotted in one of these qualifiers qualifying with Burn. There is one sort of unexpected result right there in second place. That is Willie Edel eschewing any green or black cards for blue and red ones.
Which is interesting because Willie Edel was seen playing a Rakdos midrange, I believe would be the euphemistic term for it, deck back in the days of Strixhaven Modern, even before that as well. I think when Uro was still legal, he was slinging Blood Moons and trying to fight the good fight against the villain there. And now, there is a very good and very well established Rakdos space, like a Mardu Grixis deck, which is doing very well, and it'll go with this instead, which is interesting to see.
Yeah, I would hope that he's learned his lesson about Magmatic Channeler by now and is just, back to the good stuff, but he'll probably regress soon.
Yeah, it's not even the best channeler that you can play anymore. There's a much better one that has come in there to steal its thunder. But speaking of thunder, we have Thunderkin Awakener again back in Dirk's winning list. And so this is a much more linear, I guess, take on the Elementals archetype, where we have the 4 Awakeners, we have Vespelark to pair with those, where the Vespelark can return the Awakener, and then the Awakener can return Risen Reef, being the highlight there. But if you have a way to pump its power, which Gahira conveniently does, or the lesser Omnath 4 mana can do as well, then that opens up things like Returning Solitude, which is a great line, and so on and so forth. And this comes at the expense of stuff like the main deck to Fairies, which Canister has clung to, Prismatic Ending. There's no like Utopia Sprawl to accelerate those Risen Reef draws. So this list is a lot more focused in that sense, and so it's doubling down on its main game plan at the cost of some flexibility or versatility in certain matchups.
Well, that's true. I do like how well trimmed the like flexible Harbinger style slots are. There's not like Unsettled Mariner going on. It's just like a couple Voice of Resurgence is filler. There is a Lightning Scale Elemental, an Endurance, a Florahedron, the Omnath, the other broken one. Just a lot of very precise decisions there that I like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a few different templates for how to succeed with Elementals on the table here. The one other thing I would highlight from this event would be the Amulet list in third place from House of Mana. And one card which I discussed with him in the lead up to the event, having seen it suggested elsewhere, and which really came through, was Swan Song. So this is kind of a throwback to the circa 2015 Amulet Bloom list, where against a deck like Twin, for example, that would counter whatever their way to fight on the sack was, whether it's your Remand, Cryptic Command, or something else. But crucially, it could also defend against enchantments like Blood Moon and Splinter Twin. And that dynamic is in play again here, where against the Footfalls deck, for example, they often have 3 to 4 copies of Blood Moon in their sideboard, but also their main plan, their namesake, is cascading into a powerful sorcery or trying to fight you with stuff like Force Negation. And so this kind of covers all of your bases there too.
It's the same thing against the Izzet deck, right? They have Blood Moon and Unholy Feet, and you have to fight over both of those. And this card
exactly.
doesn't.
Yeah, so an interesting choice there to keep in mind if you are a Primeval Titan enthusiast. Let's go now to the Sunday Super Qualifier, where the story arc finish in a way that you couldn't possibly script. Guillaume Rafo-Tapa is back on the Train, Pro Tour equivalent, Mythic Championship, whatever the event is. Guillaume Rafo-Tapa, who should be there anyway by virtue of the supposedly lifetime Hall of Fame invites, has won his way there the hard way.
Yeah. Let's talk about these very slight adjustments. Turns out the Wall of Omens was not weight bearing. It is no longer in the deck. I want to talk about the sideboard because Tempted by the Auric is a card. I did not realize this card had the Planeswalker line until just now, but it makes a ton of sense to play it over Entrancing Melody as that is brought up.
Yeah, this is a format where Ren and 6 and Teferi are very popular cards and also a nightmare for any kind of control deck. And you can Prismatic Ending those, but your endings are going to be somewhat overstretched. And Tempted by the Auric is, if you can resolve that, the best answer imaginable to either of those cards.
Yeah. What about Summary Dismissal? Do you have any idea what this is doing?
This was a card that control decks turned to against Tron back in the day, and I assume it's reprising that role here. In addition, this gets through stuff like Cavern of Souls out of Elementals, which maybe could be a use for it too.
Yeah, looking at it, it felt to me like the kind of thing that you put in your deck to beat Tron that didn't actually save the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, even with that, like, this is a deck which, because it has, Counterspell, Archmage's Charm, and so on, you can't really afford to run any copies of Field of Ruin, and I guess we have 2 Spreading Seas, so those do some amount of work, I suppose. But yeah, I think this is a card you put in as a theoretical Outertron that moves your matchup from 20% to 25, 30%, but maybe that's still a lost cause.
Yeah, a lot of Cascade in this top 8 as well. It's 3? 4? Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah, and so Rafo-Tapa's deck with 4 Teferi Time Raveler and 2 Chalice of the Void in the main deck, ideally set up to beat that, and then if the game goes long, Counterspell, Archmage's Charm offer a good line of defense there, and joining those in the sideboard, 3 Dove and Speedo, and 3 Flusterstorm. So really difficult for any Cascade deck to work its way through all of that.
Yeah, they're probably going to have to start casting some Striped Riverwinders and putting those on the stack to really get through that. In between all these Cascade decks, I like a lot of the other lists in this top 8. I really like Burn in 8th. I'm with Patrick Sullivan that, to use his exact quote, this deck slaps right now. I don't know how I feel about this exact list of Burn with Bump in the Night off of Black Splash, but I think that the like hyperlinear version of Burn might be the best of the like old modern decks that have been popping back up.
I would agree with that. And not to tip our hand too much for our budget modern episode or modern without all of the nonsense from MH2, Burn is both a cheap and seemingly very good option right now if you're looking to work your way into modern or work your way back into modern. But I do want to touch on the most adorable aspect of the Waffo Tapper victory lap here, and that's that between Saturday and Sunday, the Hall of the Storm Giants from the Celery list became, of course, one copy of Celestial Colonnade for Sunday.
That's probably better. That's probably a better land.
Yes, and to be fair, when you win both events, really hard to draw any conclusion from that as to which is better, but I guess the scoreboard works both ways there.
Yeah, Shaheen will have plenty of content for the next 3 weeks of keeping him happy in the modern queues. Just Waffo is really, really saving that man's sanity.
You love to see it. And so going down the rest of these lists, we have Rooney 56 in 4th. So another one of these indomitable creativity mainstays here with just 2 Emrakuls in the main deck and no other creatures in the sideboard, keeping that very focused there. We got some Hammer, some more Cascade decks, and this is another event where, again, the top 8 may be a little misleading in the sense that it gives you an impression of maybe more diversity, and then you look down the top 16, top 32, and it's Hammer and Murktide from pillar to post.
Well, the 9th place list is the Urza's Saga, Renin 6, Ragavan, sort of a Murktide deck. Yeah, that's a little different. I mean, it's a lot of the same cards. It feels like it's doing the same thing, but it's a little different.
Yeah, this takes the line that we use about this being MH2 block constructed and really dials that up to the extreme. I guess MH1 block constructed too. Ren and 6 doing some good work there. We have I'm going to say normal in air quotes list of Bluetron here in 13th, although I don't know what normal Bluetron even looks like or if that's a fair phrase anymore.
Well, there's a talisman. I like the talisman split here. We just have 3 different talismans because I don't have a reason. I don't have a reason.
Do they need to justify themselves to you? No. We got no Giganthus here, no Dismembers. This is full-on mono blue and technically a little bit of colorless Tron.
I do think we remember to mention that Mono Teamer Tron finished in 17th place in the Saturday challenge?
We did. Trelon Triumtron back on top, or I guess in 17th, but back on top once again.
Yeah, nonsense of the week making itself known worldwide.
Yeah, you really do love to see that in particular. And let's round this out now by going over to down south for the Hunter Burton Memorial Open here, where in the top 8 we had 2 Crashing Footfall decks with one of them in the hands of Gary Wong taking the whole thing down. We had a white-black Reanimator deck as well. So haven't seen that one put up results in a while, but always kind of on the outer orbit, threatening to crack its way in. And as I said, I've been looking into that archetype a lot recently and writing about it, in fact, this week for SUG. And so nice to see that doing well. Gonna explore some of the card choices there. And then rounding out the top 8, we have a Gruul food deck, which I guess Overall Chase Daredevil technically makes it Jund, but come on now. And so this almost feels like a consolidation of the actual Jund food deck that we saw from Karan Chetty last week. And so, cutting the grist, cutting some of the more ambitious black component, and just reducing it to the bare bones there. And then we got some Hammer, some red-green Ponza. We have the dress down Shadow deck in the hands of Aspiring Spike, and then actually Is It Prowess deck, not Murktide Region, but just Is It Prowess. The old Band of Brothers plus Dragon Space Channeler rounding out the top 8. But let's talk about the the Shadow deck, and in particular the card Dress Down, because this is a card that has a lot going on here, and its implications won't be immediately obvious if you haven't seen this card in action before.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to point this out is that there are no Scourge of the Skyclaves in this deck. And then you can start thinking about the implications from there.
Yeah, so what Dress Down does is creatures lose all abilities, and when it comes in, you draw a card, and then you sacrifice it at end of turn. So the base case is, your opponent casts a Omnath Locus of Creation, let's say. You Dress Down in response, they don't draw the card when it comes in, they can't play a land and get a bunch of landfall triggers immediately. So there are a bunch of use cases like that. There's also, specifically against the card Urza Saga, the constructs that it makes, the way they're templated is they're 0/0s as a baseline, and they get +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And so removing those abilities destroys the token. And so if your opponent has made 2 tokens and now they're threatening to find another artifact and bury you, you can at least kill both tokens and draw a card for 2 mana, which is a pretty nice exchange there. But in terms of how this interacts with Spike's own cards, there's a lot of dimensions to that as well. So the first thing, of course, that stands out is this is a Lurrus deck, and this is a card which sacrifices itself each turn and draws a card, so you can build your own card draw engine that way if the game goes long. And then this isn't a Scourge of the Skyclaves deck. This is still a Death Shadow deck, and the way those 2 cards work together actually is pretty beneficial. So Death Shadow is printed as a 13/13, and then it gets -1/-1 for each point of life you have. And so removing that text just turns Shadow into a 13/13. So it's not quite a Team of Battle Rage, but if you need a sudden burst of damage to add to your clock or to mess up some combat math, then Dress Down can do that for you as well. It's an enchantment, so pairs nicely with your Dragon's Rage Channeler insofar as you play this, you can then scry to see what the top card is going to be. And, if you're digging for something in particular, I guess Surveil rather, you can help to find that more quickly. And then when the Dress Down bins itself, it's that elusive card type in there to help towards that. But also, one line that I think we actually saw on camera from Spike is you can Dress Down to shrink your Channeler to get it under Ensnaring Bridge, or to stop it from having to attack into some large flyer that would eat it otherwise. So it can stave that off for a turn. And then finally, one of the more threatening combos in the deck is this is also a Croxa deck. So Crocs are just an excellent card at a baseline, the way the deck is constructed, but you can go end of turn Dress Down on your opponent's turn. The Dress Down will then stick around on your own turn and go away in your end step. And so while that card is in play, you cast Croxa, you don't get the discard trigger from it, but what you do get is no escape trigger. So you have the 6/6 Croxa ready to start attacking next turn without having to, fill your graveyard and then spend 4 mana escaping it.
Yeah, I don't know what we expected from Captain Tail's End himself. So this is really just more of the same, except for the banned Uro.
Yeah, there is a timeline in which you get to do that trick with Uro, and I guess that's funny the first time you see it, and then the novelty wears off very, very quickly.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely horrible, and I'm okay not thinking about casting Uro basically ever again.
Yeah, just don't play Legacy anytime soon.
That's fine. That's fine. I can skip it.
Yeah, and you won't have to worry about that. So a really interesting deck, and under that broad umbrella of these disruptive Ragavan DRC decks, this is a powerful option that's been putting up a bunch of results. Any broader or specific commentary on it?
No, I'm still sort of skeptical of this deck because aside from the cute Dress Down stuff, it has a lot of sort of flaws in what it's. I don't want to say flaws, but it's doing a lot of work to not really exceed the power of a lot of other stuff in a meaningful way. How much better is setting up this Dress Down line than just playing cards and having Murktide Regent?
Yeah, if instead you have a bunch of Terminates and Colligans commands and stuff, then maybe that's just a better approach to take. And even though the interaction with Death Shadow is quite cute, I almost wonder if you're meant to just be a more generic Grixis deck that happens to have access to this card, and without needing to damage yourself to work towards Death Shadow instead.
Yeah, well, I like the I think my issue is not within the Grixis shell so much as just like within the Channeler Pilferer. Like, if I'm going to play a Ragavan Dragonray Channeler deck, I don't really know why I'm playing Dress Down instead of Izzet or even instead of like the Urza Saga Asmore deck from this top 8.
Yeah, so that specifically being the red-green food deck, which I guess we could circle back to close out not just this top 8, but this entire segment here. So I'll pull this up on the console. So this is, we're going to see exactly what they listed this as. So this might be a fun exercise. Jund food, okay.
Yep. So it's 4 Asmore, 4 Channeler, 4 Street Wraith, 4 Daredevil, 4 Tarmogoyf, Cookbook, Bauble, Lightning Bolt, some Finale of Devastation, bit of a toolbox with the Urza Saga stuff, exactly 1 Unholy Heat and some Traverses. And then the sideboard does have Fury, which I'm pretty into.
Yeah, so worth noting, first of all, both Finale of Devastation and Traverse Evenmold here. So both of those can fetch Asmore, and then that interaction of Finale for 0 for just 2 mana fetching Asmore was one of the cornerstones of the more developed versions of the green food decks that we saw a few weeks ago, and that we spoke to Doomwake about in his episode here. And then beyond that, there's actually like a core of just a good like Delirium aggro deck here, where you have the Channeler and the Tarmogoyf backed up by Lightning Bolt, Mishra's Bauble, the 1 Unholy Heat, and Urza Saga, being the enchantment land. And I don't know why that interaction tickles me so much, but it does. Maybe this is me convincing myself that Urza Saga imposes some kind of deck building incentives on you when it really doesn't. But I think this is just a very solid deck, and this is the kind of thing which is very open to being exploited by the linear decks of the world. Like, I would not want to play this against Tron, for example. But barring that, if your opponent is fighting fair, then this looks like a good place to be.
Yeah, I think even the linear decks are less of a problem than you think they are, outside of literal Tron, and I think that just has to do with how good Urza Saga is at providing a relevant hate card.
Yes, which there isn't too much of in game 1, so you're open to be more exploited there. But if this can find like the Soul Guide Lantern or the Pithing Needle that you need to shut their deck down, then maybe that carries a lot of weight by itself. And I guess also, once you have this small traverse package, like there are going to be games where you're behind on board and then you traverse for Fury and blow them out, and that's going to happen a decent amount of the time.
Well, like I guess specifically I'm thinking like Burn is one of the linears, and you can just like game 1 Shadow Spear or Construct, and that's it.
How often with Burn is like just turn on Codebook good enough to seal the deal?
Yeah, I think that is one of P. Sully wrote briefly about Burn in his mailbox last week. Now it'll have been. And I think he did specifically mention Cookbook as a problem, and it does seem like people being able to like the battle of Cookbook versus Burn is like, I would like to draw a card that deals 3 damage, and your opponent's just like, every turn they draw a card that does -3 damage. Like, this can't turn out well.
Yeah, not sure if you've done the math or anything, but that one doesn't line up so well. In any case, I think that's going to do it for this this bumper weekend of Modern Results. I imagine next weekend will be a little less eventful, but still a lot to get to there. For now, though, we will take a short break and we'll come back with our main topic here. Stay tuned.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts, and right here on StarCityGames.com.
All right, let's dive into our main topic of the week here, and that's the Modern Horizons 2 exit interview of sorts, I suppose, because as I said at the top, I don't think most of these cards are going anywhere anytime soon, although I guess we'll get to that for one of these questions. So the reference material that we're using here is the exit interview article that we contributed to, along with several of our colleagues over at Star City Games on the Select side. So definitely would recommend reading that and following along with that as you listen to this, if you can. So we'll start right at the top here with the tweet length reviews of Modern Horizons 2, which for some of us, we contributed words to these answers, and for you, you just fired off a good old Wikipedia link.
Yeah, I was shocked that I was not asked for additional text on this. This is the Wikipedia link to the page Ship of Theseus. This is the classic, like literally classical thought experiment. I believe I'm reading this now because I forget which of the Greek philosophers brought it up, but it's Plato. It's the idea that you take a ship and bit by bit you replace all the bits of the ship with, a new board, a new mast, and then you put it to sail. Are you sailing the same ship? And basically that is kind of what's happened to Modern Horizons 2, it feels like. The gameplay doesn't feel not modern-y. It feels really like high synergy, high efficiency. Oh my gosh. Dog, come on, buddy. We have a guest appearance by Zoro who has extreme thoughts on his situation right now, but it's fine. Anyways, the idea is that excuse me on that. The idea is that even if modern feels like modern, are we still like playing modern, or are we playing Modern Horizons 2 constructed?
Yeah, the Wikipedia page goes into this thought experiment in many tweets worth of detail, which feels like cheating the parameters of the question here, but I kind of respect the simplicity of just, this page has covered it in more detail than I have time for here, so feast your eyes on this. And yeah, and I think it's more acute in some places than in others, where that idea of gradual replacement. So you think about the Izzet prowess decks, for example, which were ruling the roost before MH2. And with this new crop of MH2 cards, you start to ask yourself these questions like, well, if I'm casting a bunch of spells and I want more good one-drop threats, then, hey, Dragon's Rage Channeler looks really good, right? And in some ways, this is even less demanding than the actual prowess cards themselves, where I have to time my spells in a certain way to get the damage boost there. And so if I'm moving away from that angle, well, hey, Ragavan starts to look like a really good one-drop to work its way into the equation. And if I want a removal spell that can take down some larger creatures, then, oh, hey, Unholy Heat. This one looks pretty appealing too. Already have an interest in Delirium for my channelers. And then, if everyone's playing Unholy Heat, as I think they should, then Stormwing Entity starts to look a little bit worse, but I want something that dodges the other removal like Fatal Push and Prismatic Ending. So, oh, hey, Murktide Region. Hear all about that one over on Dominaria's Judgment. And so you end up with a deck which philosophically plays out in quite a different way from the prowess decks of old. And if you conceptualize it in that way when you're playing against them, then you're going to run into some issues. And yet it's easy to see how brick by brick you end up in a totally different place.
Yeah, I think that it's very possible that this is not actually the right analogy in retrospect, because I think there's a more gradual sort of implication to this analogy, to the actual Ship of Theseus, as opposed to kind of how, you're saying it was gradual that you kind of slipped from prowess into, is it Murktide? I don't think it was especially gradual. I think it happened really absurdly fast.
Yeah, and maybe that hits home more when you look at stuff like the Reanimator decks that have been popping up, right? Where if you think about the ingredients that kind of deck needs to succeed, you need a way to bin your creature, a way to get back your creature, and then a good creature to make all of that worth your time. And you would think coming into this set, maybe one of those three ingredients needed some help to push it over the line. And instead, the best cards in all three categories are just in this set. And so this really does feel like an MH2 block constructed deck. And there's no, gradually replacing the timbers on the ship there. It's just, oh, here's a shiny new boat for you to enjoy.
I think that those kind of feel less like, I think the Murktide Regents of the world are the ones that are a little more jarring, despite them being the things that are the most analogous to stuff that already existed, because it feels like, it's like, oh, a new set could bring a new deck regardless. Like, if you print another artifact set, there's going to be another stupid broken artifact deck. That's just what happens, right? But when you print something that just kind of like rotates out all of the existing top threats for effectively the same stuff, like I don't think to the average person just kind of looking at the format they don't feel like Is It Murktide and Is It Prowess are distinctly different in terms of what they're offering the format, but one of them just has 20 Modern Horizons 2 cards,
right? And it's almost absorbed some of the MH2 cards which you think would make themselves known in other places. So this article is full of Shaheen celebrating the fact that Counterspell is showing up in all the blue decks. And once you dig deeper into the details there, you realize the blue deck that it's showing up in is the Is It Murktide region deck, right? Predominantly. And outside of Waffo Tapper just going on his celebration lap with all these different varieties of control decks, by and large, you're not seeing these new blue reactive cards actually show up in a reactive context. It's more as a way to cement an existing advantage in a tempo deck, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that the closest thing to a control deck in the format just doesn't even play Counterspell because it's too busy playing 3 other colors of cards.
Right, and that's this ties into the kind of money tribal, as some people have dubbed it, or these like 4-color mid-rangey soup decks where the mana works out, and especially in these 4-color decks where one of those cards is Ren and 6 a lot of the time, where that ends up being your best mana fixer in this perverse way. And so you just get to play your pick of the litter. You take the best cards from each of these different color combinations or approaches to playing the game and just get to mash them in one deck. And when you do that, not all of those cards will be operating at maximum capacity. Some of them will be 7s out of 10 instead of 10s out of 10. But these cards are all so powerful just at a baseline that you can get away with that, right?
Yeah, though I guess we've gotten on this sidetrack about the 4-color decks and these mashup decks. It's interesting that this like raw power pile, like the 4-color deck, is one of the ones that's like least impacted by Modern Horizons 2. Right, like all the various end games are stuff that existed before. Scapeshift, Velomachus, or Emrakul off of Indomitable Creativity. Like, it's really just Prismatic Ending being added there. The mashups of like good cards that are being made good by this set it's weirdly just like pushed out like in the Death Shadow and Prowess range.
Yeah, so you have a bunch of different Channeler and Ragavan decks, but under that umbrella, you can play Grixis or Mardu or Black Red, or I guess you could just keep it strictly mono red if you prefer. But all of those have a similar kind of feel to them in a way that I guess maybe this is what you would expect, right? Is if you get to draw from across the color pie, then those decks should feel more distinct in a way. And so you get this flavor of combo control deck here with creativity and so on. And even within there's a question of what you want your targets to be and what incentives does that place upon you. And then over here, you've got the Dryad and Bring to Light stuff. And then you've got the Elementals decks, which have a few similarities maybe, but also are just off doing their own thing, fueled by as many MH2 cards as they can get their hands on.
Yeah, I think we may want to move away from this like initial like what discussion of like everything feeling sort of like a weird replacement and start talking about some of these other responses, because it's sort of interesting to see the disparate reactions to like what is and isn't overpowered in the format. Like Brad makes a joke about not wanting to print another Hogak and then making another card that's so similar in Murktide region. Corey, aka Brad's little bro, is talking about, Ragavan being absurd, but like declaring Murktide region fine. And then Sam is just saying, nothing, too crazy or radically changing. It's kind of interesting that like, I think this kind of reflects in one of the next questions we'll get to. This set had like so many cards that are really, really busted, but like in a way that none of them stands out the way Hogak did.
Yeah, and I think you can understand why that would be the metric for success for Brad and for Sam, who were doing some work on the set where they know what the pedigree is with MH1. They know the cautionary tale that they're seeking to avoid. And so if you can come away with your work on that set thinking, okay, we at least managed to dodge that bullet. There's no Hogak, there's no Astrolabe, there's no, whatever your mistake from the set would have been, then that's a success. Even though if you could go back in time and fix some things in MH2, maybe you would do some things differently. And especially with that look that Sam gave us behind the curtain there in that article on Sam's role in the development process, seeing some of the cards that were initially slated to be in the set, and then some of the initial prototypes for cards that did make it in, Sign of Draco being having twice the stats that it did in the final form. You could see why, compared against that baseline, what we actually got looks pretty tame and pretty successful by comparison.
It's sort of interesting that you mentioned that there's no Astrolabe, because, how close to an Astrolabe is Ragavan? It's kind of interesting to talk about those two cards in the similar space.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that with Ragavan, you build your deck with the hope and expectation that it's either going to connect or you can exchange cards off to force it to connect. But you can't rely on Ragavan as a form of mana fixing, because then so often your fragile 1-drop dies and you just don't get to cast your spells. Whereas Astrolabe is almost, that is the gimmick, right? It's the mana constraints in the format just don't really exist in the same way once you put that card in your deck.
Yeah, it's also I guess Astrolabe might just promote more inherently nonsense things. Like Goober Artifact is going to result in, self-replacing Goober Artifact is going to result in more nonsense than just Jackal Pup.
Yeah, Ragavan at least enters combat. There's an incentive to point removal spells at it. With Astrolabe, you often felt very inclined to try and trade off with it somehow, but if you did, you were starting off down a card for the most part, or certainly down on mana, so you can never quite talk yourself into doing that. And then, as you say, it's the thing about Astrolabe is it is not the star of the show by itself, but because it is this effectively colorless widget that fits in so many different places, it draws you a card, so you can blink it, you can recur it, it ties into any artifact stuff that you have going on, and then also have so much more freedom to play whatever other cards you want. It's hard to nail Astrolabe as the culprit for the broken stuff that's going on, when in reality it is the thing that's tying the whole room together.
Yeah, and I do think there's a little bit of that in the dash part of Ragavan that makes it kind of a pain to interact with. But that may just be the kind of thing where it's I'm thinking of how they printed Prismatic Ending in this set, and then Ragavan having dash is one of the key things that makes Prismatic Ending not as universal as it
and that is a dynamic that I really saw play out over the last few weeks, is as players got more experience playing with Ragavan and against Prismatic Ending, so often in the past, you could rely on tagging a Ragavan with your ending, whereas nowadays, you often end up stranded with an ending in your hand that never has a window to hit Ragavan, because they know it makes more sense to play a slower game, but one where you can just get in for two, and never have to expose your creature to a removal spell.
Yeah. The first time I had an opponent just kind of play that way when I was playing one of the 4-color pals was just kind of oh gosh, I need to actually think about what my Teferis are doing and all this stuff it just starts becoming a real headache.
I don't fully hate that. I like that ending is not as universal a spell as it seems to market itself as. But yeah, definitely a weakness of that card to be aware of. Let's move on to the second question here, which is, what's your most liked card in MH2? And I think it's interesting to study the contrast in people's answers here versus the first time, where some of it may be spawned by just wanting to give a different answer. It may be, what is the card you've grown to appreciate most over time compared to during preview season. But for example, I gave Urza Saga as my answer the first time around. Did not say that this time, even though still very fond of that card and think it's in mostly a healthy place in the format. But Brad is highlighting Urza Saga. Corey says Urza Saga by a lot. And I find it hard to argue with them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel aside from my same joke that I keep running back, I feel I did put I was in the same kind of ballpark of previously liking Academy Manufacturer and now liking Profane Tutor. But I think that after playing, I guess I get to this a bit later, but I think that some of the mechanics in Modern Horizons 2 being layered in like adjacent standard sets may have sort of dulled the excitement for them. It's weird to say that like, I mean, I think that like Academy Manufacturer versus like putting Zorn into Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, like that really kind of makes it less interesting as a card. And I think that maybe a lesson learned for Modern Horizons 3 is to be very careful about choosing things that are not going to find their way into like recent sets. It's hard to plan like super far ahead in the future, and I don't know if the schedule got shifted for this a lot. I know there was some like release juggling this year for obvious reasons, but I think that there's a lot of value in using this as a place to produce things that are very specifically Modern Horizons only.
Yeah, I think some of that may just be food fatigue from Standard, where as Throne of Eldraine is finally on the brink of rotating out in a month from now, and now we're reliving some part of that, not even anywhere close to the most obnoxious part of that, but I think there's some amount of scarring from that whole experience. But it's also, to contrast that with Investigate, for example, which I've seen no complaints about that mechanic coming back. I think that's almost universally regarded as a hit, and the gameplay there is pretty different from how food tends to play out. But I think that makes this whole bundling feel a little bit more arbitrary, where we have the food stuff that we've just seen a lot of, the treasure stuff that we're promoting in these adjacent sets, and in between that, we're kind of jumping back in time to yoink Investigate into this mix as well, and just conceptually grouping all of these together for some reason.
I think that the conceptual grouping in this set may have been the mistake. Like, what's the Fey? What is it called? Fey Offering, yeah. The green enchantment and Academy Manufacturer. I think that if Investigate stood on its own, it is a completely functionally different mechanic than treasures and food. Just because there actually is, like, just the way that you have to make Investigate, like, the way the food decks and, like, the treasure decks just end up with a million freaking treasures or food. Because, like, once you make your first couple treasures or couple food, the, like, fifth copy is just another artifact on the battlefield. Whereas with Investigate, like, the difference between, like, the third, the fourth, the fifth, like, that's where the game starts to get ran away with card advantage. And, like, that's actually a pretty relevant part of the game. So I think that maybe that was like, it feels too samey because food and treasure are just like very similarly scaled.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference between the way in which both clues and treasure tap into just natural gameplay mechanics, where, yeah, your otherwise completely ordinary deck wants to pay 2 mana to draw a card sometimes. It wants to jump up in mana by sacrificing treasure. And you can imagine a deck which has a lot of layered clue or treasure stuff going on, but where it's never really explicitly referenced by name. It's just that's a thing you do over the course of a few turns. Whereas with food, it often feels like you're not putting these cards in your deck so that you can sacrifice a food every other turn and get a nice life buffer going on. You're doing it because you have cards in your deck that look for the word food, and you need to make things that have the word food on them to key off those cards in a way which we're seeing some of that with like Goldspan Dragon and Kalain and so on for treasure, and you had some amount of that with Investigate too. But that tie-in there feels a little bit more natural now because, all right, I already want to do this, and now this is giving me additional reasons to, whereas the only reason I want to pursue food is because I already had a good reason to pursue food.
Yeah, and I think that the other kind of interesting part about clues that sort of sets them apart is that, like, the act of generating clues actually, like, self-ends a game because it gives you resources that actually convert to something. Whereas, like, treasure only works towards that in the short term, and food just, like, if you have like 30 food, the game is never going to end. Magic Online will crash and you'll be at 107.
It's very fitting that there are many games of Throne of Eldraine Limited that feel like they could still be going on right now, after close to 2 years. So that's just the effect that food has on the game if both players have access to it and you're not dealing damage in these large increments. But let's talk about the cards that we did call out as being our favorites here. So you mentioned Profane Tutor, which feels in a lot of way like the null cost spells done right. I mean, this is what you're going for instead of just making the obvious joke of pairing it with Violent Outburst and Shardless Agent.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ancestral vision to the rest of the cycle's Living End or Restore Balance.
And I myself mentioned one of the other cards in that cycle in Glimpse of Tomorrow, which... So, jumping ahead to the card most likely to get banned, this was actually your answer to that question, and my willingness to answer that here is highly tied to how likely that is, because if this card ends up being good enough that it has to enter that discussion, that is a miserable gameplay experience for everyone involved. And there's the obvious counterplay to Cascade in general in the form of Chalice of the Void and Void Mirror, and you've heard this joke so many times before. But I think Glimpse right now is in that sweet spot of being charming and like, okay, you lose a game to Glimpse because they do their thing, and then usually your hate or your interaction is good enough to carry the day, the other two games enough of the time. And I think it sets up more interesting questions in terms of how do I get enough permanence in advance to rig the odds in my favor here, and how do I put enough big hits in my deck to ensure that this is worth my time while having a functional deck in the interim when I'm not doing this thing, in a way that, the Crashing Footfall stuff, you just put those cards in your deck and surround it with the generically good interaction that happens to meet your cost requirements. Or with Living End, so much of your deck is taken up with these cycling creatures that there really isn't just that much room to experiment or do anything else between that.
Yeah, I will say that the Glimpse decks that are doing well are ones that I've actually, like, in the style of things that I've actually had fun when I've worked with them. I'll save my comments on that card's existence in the format for later, but I think that the way people are playing the card is actually pretty fun, and you're pretty much on the nose here. Let's talk a bit about why Urza Saga stands out as a uniquely fun card. How much of it is that you think people are kind of clamoring for the old artifact style decks?
I think that's a big part of it, and we've seen some brave souls try to pair Urza with its Saga in a very flavorful move, and I've done my best to do that myself as well. I think that that style of gameplay, it feels very unique and very unique to Modern as well. I think of Modern as it used to be the format of Mox Opal, and then we had KCI, the actual Urza decks, and this feels like the kind of format where that just silly shenanigans involving artifacts has room to breathe in a way that the tools aren't there in smaller formats, and you have some of that going on in Vintage or whatever, but that's just priced into Moxen and Workshop being legal, right? It doesn't feel like a cute feature of that format, whereas Modern feels like this is, and has been over the years, this is where you get to do that kind of thing. And I think Urza Saga, consciously or subconsciously, does tap into some of that.
Yeah, and I do think that the counterplay aspect that was brought up for Urza Saga is really important, where it is uniquely exposed to a lot of interaction, and people really enjoy getting that lineup, even if it's kind of a dicey lineup some of the time. It feels really satisfying when you get to wear tear it, or when you spreading sees it. It's just really it's a really good gotcha moment.
Yeah, I think it also hits the right note of being just very powerful in almost any deck that can fit it. And we've seen some really out there examples of decks that seem like very incongruous homes for Urza Saga, just finding a way to slot that card in and have it be, a 6 out of 10 there. But if you want to make it a 10 out of 10, you really can. And so coming off of last week's episode, for example, about why black sucks in Modern, I was doing my due diligence a week late, trying some of these black decks for myself. One of the decks I tried was this Reanimator Asmo kind of mashup, where I thought, all right, so I have Cookbook here as a good discard outlet, and then once I'm doing that, I have the Asmore package as a backup plan, and Urza Saga as this threat that doesn't use the graveyard. And there was such a big delta in those games between where I didn't have Cookbook and I had to rely on like getting really scrappy with my 2/2 or 3/3 constructs, and the games where I did have Cookbook and I was making like 8/8 constructs, and those were bigger than anything I could possibly hope to reanimate. And you really get to experience both sides of that with that card.
I have enjoyed the card Cookbook in the capacity of what it does by itself, but I have other concerns. We'll get to that in a bit. Let's give Shaheen a moment in the sun. I think Counterspell has actually been a pretty, we've mentioned it. I have found it to be an enjoyable part of Modern, but mostly I think in the context of what Modern Horizons 2 has done to the format. I don't know how enjoyable Counterspell would have been just getting dropped into the format, 5 months ago. But in the context of a much more efficient Modern, it is really nice to have like a card that is not the best against the other efficient cards, but is good against the non-efficient stuff that like historically has been a worse part of the format.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in two minds here, because on the one hand, and this is my eventual conclusion in this article, the cheap cards really do not need the help. And I don't think Modern, with the direction it's taking right now, we've already gone from Primeval Titan being everywhere week 1 to basically being nowhere now. Tron had a brief resurgence last week, but that's dying down a little bit. And by and large, the story of Modern over the past few months has been you take as many of the good cheap cards as you can and pack them in the same deck together. In that context, I don't know if the job that Counterspell is doing there is really a good one. On the other hand, as you say, it's much easier to lightning bolt a Dragon's Rage Channeler and feel like both sides got to participate in that exchange versus one player is casting Khan Liberated ad nauseum Primeval Titan, and you need something like Counterspell, I think, to actually act as a safeguard against those people.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's so much like a safeguard, because it doesn't even really, it's not fully closing the gap on the Tron matchup or anything. It's just letting you feel like you're participating, and that's really great.
And that's a lot of what the game design procedure is, right? It's making people feel like they got to participate, even if ultimately it's just delaying the inevitable by a little bit, or actually this was all going to end up this way in the end, and it's just disguising it temporarily. I think that's fine. That is part of what the experience is. And yeah, Sam in his answer mentioned Cookbook as a card that they actually apparently missed the interaction with Oval Chase Daredevil, and I can see missing that specific interaction, but you would think that combining this with like a Squee or Master of Death, which is in this set, which I haven't seen anyone actually do yet, but that seems very much on the table at some point. It seems like that at least would have been considered. But I do think it's interesting that both Sam and you have highlighted Cookbook as an interesting incentive card or build around, but Asmore itself does not make that list. And so as we move on to your most hated cards in MH2, this was your entry for that question.
Yeah, I think that the cards that some of the interaction in this set has been good. Some of it has been more of a problem. And I think Asmore is kind of the peak of that issue, where like so much of the Asmore gameplay experience is like getting Shriekmaw into getting Visarad and just like not playing the game. I don't really get what the upside of this card existing as it is printed is.
It ends up playing out like some weird aggro prison deck almost, where Asmo on rate is 1 mana 3/3 enough of the time to where that can be good. You're pairing it with Urza Saga to where you're making a bunch of constructs that can get the game over with quickly. And so it's almost like it hides from you how obnoxious its play pattern is, because sometimes you just kill them before they have enough time to languish in their jail cell, so to speak.
Yeah, I there's a lot. I don't. The fact that it's so. I think the most annoying part of Asmore, thinking more and like trying to figure out the right way to put this, is that it's just so unscoped. Like it's just a lot of words for just to say destroy target creature, and I think that like even the formatting is not great. There's just so many words before you even get to the part where it's just killing all of your opponent's stuff that like your eyes have glazed over and you're like, what's happening? Oh no, I can't play the game. Like, I don't really. I think that like for trying to make a card that's like a one-off punchline, making it this is like really bad.
Yeah, you have the aesthetic ugliness of this is in the set, which is pushing madness as a mechanic, but none of the madness cards are actually good enough to see any play, and so you have like the tireless tracker thing where it's the best landfall card, even though it doesn't have the word landfall on it. And I think they said they had to set it up this way because the way the rulings worked for Commander, you couldn't actually have madness and then be in the command zone and have it be cast in a conventional manner, which, all right, that's fine. But if we're printing this in a modern legal constructed set where that's going to be one of its primary opportunities to shine, then that just unnecessary wordiness is going to come up an awful lot. And yeah, if you had to, maybe circling back to the first question, if you had to give a tweet length review for the set, it could just be a lot of words to say destroy target creature. Like that describes, a half dozen cards in the set by itself.
Yeah, I think my second most hated card in the set is probably Solitude for very similar reasons. Where just like it's still, that was the one I listed at first. It still is. It's like Unholy Heat is in the same boat. We're just like, you're at this point where just the overlap of efficiency and raw scope of removal is telling people to not play creatures they care about. And that's just like a really bad ask.
Yeah, I said Murktide Region, and it did not feel good to disavow my own preview card in quite that way. But this is, I think, the most egregious example of this broader trend that we've talked about, really taken to the extreme. And with Unholy Heat, okay, I can see wanting a red analog to Fatal Push that isn't just, hopefully, Lightning Bolt can destroy this or whatever. But Murktide Region is, as the Eric Lauer quotes Twitter account reminds us, it's interesting that this time the Delve card was broken, right? And I don't know. Firstly, either you didn't see it coming and that's just a massive miss and a flaw in the process, or you did see it coming and I'm not sure what novelty this was meant to really provide. Like, I don't know if that play pattern of turbo out this undercosted Delve threat and protect it with very efficient cards, there wasn't a play pattern that was lacking in other formats, and it also wasn't a play pattern that was lacking in Modern. So I don't know what hole this was meant to fill exactly.
Yeah, Gurmag Angler is a fine experience, I guess. I don't really know why it exists. I don't find it super offensive. It's just like a creature that has a lot of stats. But maybe it's just like so subsidized by the game mechanics that it's really just not worth
that's
winning.
the thing. And there will be a lot more of that in my answer to what mechanic have you soured on the most over time in a question or two. But I think it's that old legacy Delver problem of, okay, I get that you're in blue, so you have the best counter magic, right? That's part of the equation. And you have the best card draw because you're in blue. Do you also need to have the best threats as well, right? And so Gurmag Angler has not aged so well necessarily, but at least with that one, you could fly over it, you could go around it, you could outsize it sometimes, right? 5/5 is big, but it's not so big that it embarrasses anything else you're doing. Whereas, your tribal aggro deck that is built around making large creatures, whether it's humans or merfolk or whatever, Murktide Region is just guaranteed to be bigger than anything you can bring to the table, and often any two cards you can bring to the table at any one time. And so you start to think, like, why am I doing all of this and going to all of this hard work when I could just be doing that and also get to play all of the generically good cards at the same time?
Yeah, it may just be too much for too little. I know Brad listed Urza Saga as both his most liked and most hated card. Do you feel that card occupies a similar space, or are you actually having to work for that enough to, like, make it feel like something unique has occurred?
I kind of feel like I am, but I don't know how much of that is motivated reasoning because I enjoy playing the card with myself. I enjoy playing with the card myself, and if I'm on the other side of that too often, it's not going to feel like work anymore. So I'm going to give a cautious endorsement to it, but check back in the exit interview follow-up in 3 months and see what my answer is then, because it may well have changed.
Yeah, I think like a month ago, it felt like you had to do a little too little for Urza Saga. But I think that with the advent of Murktide Regent and Dragon's Rage Channeler, you actually do have to do work to get Urza Saga to be outputting the right amount of quality to match those cards.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to compare to Death Shadow here, because that used to be the biggest thing you could be doing at the best rate, but you really had to work for it. And in the sense that it wasn't too difficult to get to that point, because this is a fetch land and shockland format, and so a lot of that work is done for you. But you had to make sacrifices, and there was a lot of tension in game between, do I play towards maximizing a potential Death Shadow that I don't even have yet sometimes, or do I preserve my own life total and play a more conventional game of Magic? Because Death Shadow is asking you to do something which no other card really does, and Murktide Regent is asking you to do exactly what you already wanted to be doing anyway, and the stuff that your deck is built to optimize, and then you just get the biggest thing possible out of the equation there as well.
Yeah. Jumping to the next card that someone listed, Corey Baumeister had Shardless Agent. How much do you think having to use Ardent Plea plus Violent Outburst would change things for these Cascade decks?
We do have a comparison there with the blue Living End decks that were popping up pre-MH2. That was it was somewhat throttled by Heliod, I think, where just on the fundamentals, that matchup was kind of impossible. But that was showing up increasingly in the hands of people like Sodek and others as, you know, not one of the best decks in the format, but just a good deck that was popping up from time to time. And now it's just everywhere. And it's been juiced up by some other stuff too. You've got stuff like Foundation Breaker, Grief, Subtlety, all the free spells you could possibly want in a deck. But I do think that getting to have a much cleaner mana base, where now, staying in the team of colors and getting to have good answers within the team of colors, that's a perfect recipe for consistency. Whereas before, there were definitely games where you would draw like your Hallowed Fountain and your basic island and just not be able to cast your Violent Outburst. And having to manage that inconsistency was a real cost. Whereas now, all of the Cascade decks, basically, with the arguable exception of the Glimpse decks, you get to have this very solid structure, and then you get to do your thing within that. And there's no inherent cost just to casting your spells anymore.
Yeah, I think that the Living End deck was also like especially exposed to that issue because it's trying to cycle things for 1 mana on turn 1.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. And there's also, we shouldn't discount the fact that just being a creature gets you around a lot of stuff. So you have a 2/2 in the games where you're getting scrappy and, you cast your Shardless Agent, your Living End gets countered, but now you hardcast your Curator of Mysteries, and suddenly you actually have a board presence that needs to be handled. Or, the fact that you dodge stuff like Thalia or Aethersworn Canonist, it just narrows the range of cards that incidentally happen to be good against you.
That's true. And also just making your Footfalls 10 power instead of 8 is pretty big.
That specific power breakpoint is a really big deal, I think, for the Footfalls decks. And so I think that is why we didn't really see Outburst plus Ardent Plea in conjunction with Footfalls before, but we did see Living End. Because, when the whole premise of your deck is get some power on the board, adding 2 to that on another body is a really big deal.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about Ragavan as a hated card? Because I have heard both sides of this, and I am unsure where I quite stand. I like the idea that you can interact with it by blocking. I kind of hate that it does everything.
I kind of hate that it does everything. I like that it does unpredictable things. So, there's a lot of Twitter screenshot equity bound up in this card where, you're playing against Tron, right? And you flip their Khan the Great Creator and you cast it, and now their deck doesn't work anymore. I don't know if that's good gameplay, but it's a good story. And that's the kind of thing that this card does a lot. And I appreciate it for that. And when the card is so pushed that you can rely on it showing up in so many different places, although in their defense, if we want to frame it that way, both of us were lower on the card during previous season than maybe we should have been. when the card is going to be that ubiquitous, in all likelihood, the inherent variety in playing off what your opponent is doing compared to what you are doing matters a lot there. Where, if this card was somehow playing off your own deck, where it had some kind of Abbot of Keral Keep style templating, that would be a lot different, and I think actually a lot more obnoxious. Whereas this way, it feels very on brand, where like they snipe the perfect card to play against your own deck in that exact situation.
Yeah, I think that in Modern, in general, playing off your opponent's deck at least used to be a lot more overrated than it is these days. I think that it's kind of interesting that Ragavan itself, just being so powerful on the treasure aspect, has kind of made the other half of the ability so much better, because you're more likely to play against other Ragavan decks where hitting a card is going to be live.
Yeah, you see some of this homogenization in Legacy, where Ragavan is absolutely bananas, and part of that is there are so many opposing Ragavan decks, and the constraints in place in that format means all the decks need to have a pretty low curve, and so you're guaranteed to, or you're as likely as you can be, essentially, to flip a good card and be able to cast it in a way which was not always true in Modern and was less true, I would say, a few months ago. But now, with all of these pressures acting to push Modern into a similar place, then yeah, you're going to be flipping good hits, which maybe you don't even need the treasure sometimes if you're playing like a mirror or pseudo mirror.
Wait, you're telling me that Ragavan clearing a card that was brainstormed to the top isn't a liability?
Oh, Ragavan against Doomsday? That's that could be a heater sometimes.
Wait, is this the old do attack, don't attack, no one knows that we... Oh my gosh, we almost had both of those cards in the same model.
I still kind of want to live in that alternate universe, but maybe not for very long. Maybe just to dip my toes in there. But returning to Charlotte's Agent, I think the frustrating thing about that card is not that it's another Cascade card, because the implications there are fairly obvious. It's that, in theory, this card promises so much more, where in week 1, you saw people putting this card in humans, or pairing this card with like the General Rokirich in some Domain Zoo style deck. Or it seemed like of all of the Cascade cards, this is the one that could be versatile and do something other than the obvious thing that we were doing already. And instead, we are back to the obvious thing that everyone was doing already.
Yeah, I don't know what you expected from that.
I wishful thinking, I suppose. But we will be back with perhaps some more examples of our own wishful thinking after a short break. All right, folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about STG Premium. And for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paulo Vitor Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions, from Joey Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. Okay, let's round out this exit interview here. And question 4 on this list was rank the mythic elemental incarnations from first to worst. So this is the Solitude, Grief, Fury, Endurance, and Subtlety cycle in rough color pie order. So I think we both had Solitude as number 1 before and still have it there now. And we had, maybe the most interesting actually is what has jumped or fallen the most. And certainly for me, and I believe you as well, the answer there is Fury. Because I think this ties into the issue that we both had with Ragavan, which was that clearly this is a good card, but is there a good deck for this card? And it turns out, firstly, the answer would eventually be yes. And also, these cards are good enough that you just decide to build around them insofar as you can. But we are now in a format where just the card Fury is terrifying to play against for many decks. And if you're playing a bunch of these super cheap and super efficient threats, often those threats are pretty small. And so Fury is the pyrokinesis side grade, if you like, that it was born to be.
Yeah, I think that part of the thing with Fury is that Modern prior to this set didn't really have the right sizing of creatures for Fury to mop up, just because Lava Dart was so ubiquitous. And like the X2s were Soulscar Mage, and if you're like Furying 2 Soulscar Mages, like you're not going to. It's just you're not going to target 2 and 2 because that's not going to work out for you. So I think Fury was like coming into a format that was more hostile for it. And then as things have turned around, it's become just like absolutely absurd. I actually had Grief at number 1. And I think that we had Grief drop off less in the standings than a lot of other people did. I think that card is still bonkers. It's just every other black card is terrible.
Yeah, that card is terrifying. And in my experiments trying to see which of the black cards were actually playable this week, Grief is one that really stood out as this card is great. This is a reason to be in black. It's just that the supporting cast really is not there at this point. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of them actually is Lurrus, where just the effect of a random, I mean, I guess it's not random, but the effect of a interchangeable discard effect is so much lesser in a format where there's a free 8th card which buys back the thing that you discarded in the first place. And then also, most of the good black decks in this format are Lurrus decks. That is the best black card by a wide margin. And so in that competition, Lurrus is going to win out most of the time. But if we end up in a world, regardless of how we get there, where that's not a concern anymore, then I think people will learn to go through the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah, I want to note that Subtlety kind of ended up at the bottom of basically everyone's rankings. We should talk a bit about why that card is so much worse than the others.
Yeah.
How much of it is not wrapped up in the ephemerate stuff? Because I think that even without ephemerate, Subtlety is one of the worst.
Yeah, Subtlety it's a more reactive card than the others, or you can certainly use it in a kind of tempo positive way, and that's how I imagined it being used in some kind of a blue-white Stoneblade deck where this is a good thing to pair with like your Sword of Feast and Famine or whatever, and it can pick up the sword or other equipment. It seemed like it would be destined for that kind of shell. But yeah, this is one which you can't really exploit in quite the same way. You're not going to be ephemerating this. You're not going to be using this in conjunction with other things to like get a free Fury, so to speak. That just isn't really on the table with this card. And then also, this card is at its best when the thing that you are sending back to time walk them is a meaningful investment, where it is a Khan of whatever description. It's a Premier Titan. It's some big creature, and as we said, in a format where all the good threats now cost 1, 2, or sometimes 0 mana, just going down a card to subtlety that back feels like so much less of a good exchange.
It doesn't even answer the Karn problem.
Right, it's
like it's the reverse of the Grief thing, where like if you Grief them and they top deck the card, you're like, well, that sucks, but I couldn't protect against it. Like if you subtlety their card, you're just like, well, they're just going to top deck another card next turn, and I have to live with that.
Yeah,
that's not great.
And in that specific matchup, often the problem card is going to be something like Ulamog, where all right, okay, subtlety that, sure, but you're going to need a new and better answer to that problem before too long.
Yeah, I want to say the last thing I want to point out is that like Subtlety is by far the worst of these to just cast for the normal cost. Like, Fury is bananas on the battlefield. Like, just paying 5 mana for a Fury is great. Paying 5 mana for a Solitude, like, you can, like, scrape back into games with the lifelink. Endurance is just the right size. Grief is, like, I've had good experiences hard casting it. But, like, Subtlety, you have to, like, wait on your thing, and it's not even a great threat. It doesn't really work out the best to pay 4 mana for it.
Yeah, and I still think it's a good card, and I think if the format moves back to a point where Subtlety is legitimately strong again, then it's a sign that something really has changed in the format, that, it is much more realistic to be casting 4 mana creatures, 4 mana planeswalkers, and stuff like that, and that may be a more healthy place for Modern to be. I don't think it's where the format is at right now.
No, not in the slightest.
So let's go down here to question 5. This is the mechanic that you now hate in Modern Horizons 2 is, and predictably there were a lot of Cascade answers in here, but maybe this is me just being too pedantic about the wording of the question. But I feel like there isn't a new reason to hate Cascade, and that's part of the problem. It's not like it's doing anything new in this set. It's just taking its existing applications and doubling down on those. And so if you didn't hate Cascade before, I don't really see why you would hate it now. That being said, if you've hated Cascade for over a decade, then I think you have ample reason to be validated in that feeling now.
I think it's the Mitch Hedberg joke. It's like, I hate Cascade. I mean, I used to hate Cascade, but I still
Absolutely,
do.
Yeah.
Mine was arbitrary game objects, and this is related to that whole discussion that we had earlier about how I think that the way that this set used food and clues and treasure really made you... Their practical application of the cards that do that in Constructed is you're just making an artifact, like you're making a Darksteel ingot. Like, who cares? Like, actually using those for anything is like a tertiary concern. And I think that's just not fun. It's not interesting to just make like game object and move on with your life. Like, the game object should do something on its own.
Yeah, I think it maybe suffers a little from the artifact stuff in this set, and even in prior sets, not really tying into those in the way that was maybe hoped. So stuff like Affinity or Nettlesist, for example. Urza, if Urza is a good card in the format, you could imagine these arbitrary game objects helping to fuel that in a big way. But we just haven't seen that quite come together either. So yeah, you're just left making just a bunch of stuff, and then there's specific cards that do specific things with the stuff, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like Lego, where it's, all right, I attach this piece to this piece, and I've created something new and personal and innovative. It's, I just, here is my prefab, where I'm just doing exactly what you're telling me to do with my card.
Yeah, and then Magic Online may or may not let you do it.
Yeah, it's been under a lot of stress recently. It's been having a tough few months. My answer was Delirium, and that was a sad answer to have to give for me, because Delirium is exactly the kind of mechanic that warms my my soulless, spiky heart. It's a lot of fiddly manipulation of cards between zones to achieve often a minor payoff, and I love that. I go completely bananas for that stuff. But in this set, I think part of it is when we learned this would be the mechanic for Izzet, I was thinking, all right, there might be some really cool Delirium incentives pushed for Constructed that we can build around. And instead, it's just, DRC, which you're going to play in your spell-heavy aggro deck, and Unholy Heat, which the same. And it doesn't feel like you are actually jumping through any meaningful hoops to have to do that. So when I play a Primeval Titan, or I play Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and it instantly dies to Unholy Heat, that would be easier to stomach if it felt like my opponent had to set that up in any meaningful way. But instead, it's exactly the same things they want to do anyway. It's crack a fetch land, crack a Mishra's Bauble, cast a Serum Visions, and you just get to Delirium without even trying. And so instead of being this cool thing that you get to chase, it's a payoff for doing the obvious stuff in the most paint by numbers way possible.
Yeah, I think the Delirium is kind of a hard ask in a fetchland format to begin with. I think it's a lot more interesting when you actually have to put weird cards into your deck to support it. I know, like, it is one of my favorite limited mechanics of all time, because I just have strong memories of, like, being excited to take a artifact creature 2/1 for 2, like, just stuff like that. But it's just, I don't think it scales well into Modern. And I don't even know if Mishra's Bauble's the problem.
Yeah, if we woke up tomorrow in a world without Mishra's Bauble, I don't know how much would really change, honestly.
Yeah, it'd just still be really easy. It'd be like, okay, so creature, sorcery, instant, land. That's 4. I put a creature there because Dragon Rage Channeler does that.
I do.
Maybe it affects.
Yeah, I do have some sympathy for any deck that's trying to, like, achieve Delirium in a wonky way via stuff like Urza Saga or whatever. So there's been a family of decks that's been popping up in some of these Modern challenges where it's basically all of the good broken stuff in the same deck. So we have Ragavan and DRC, we have Urza Saga, we have like Ren and 6, and then I like Tarmogoyf, and then depending on your choice of additional color, it's either Expressive Iteration and some other stuff, or it's Esper Sentinel, which is 2 card types for all of your Delirium stuff, and it's just all the stuff in a coherent enough package to be charming and somewhat successful. And okay, that gets me going. I can I have some time for that. But when it's exactly the same play pattern that you would have in a generic, like, is it spell deck or is it tempo deck, and this is just the word that you tick off the box, then I don't really get the point there.
Yeah, I think it was also a little more palatable when it was Traverse, just because there's like a timing aspect of that Delirium where like you have to hit it before you traverse, as opposed to like with Channeler, it's just like, well, this thing's here, it's just going to get me Delirium. And maybe if Channeler wasn't paired with Unholy Heat, that might be a better thing.
Yeah, Unholy Heat just feels like 1-mana Terminate too much of the time for my liking. It would be nice if that card could reliably fail a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, it kind of just has like too many numbers and like too little threshold. It's a lot of weird stuff. And yeah, I guess we should bring up the last mechanic to show up in this breakdown, and that's Shaheen saying rebound. And I love that answer. I think that the ephemerate interactions are just like not fun. Just the whole incarnation ephemerate thing. Like, I don't care how good it is. I don't see what's fun about it.
Yeah, it's not an answer that I expected to see show up on this list, but in the context of Shaheen yelling at clouds, it actually it almost feels like the only answer possible here.
Yeah, well, like, what's going to happen when they rebound an ephemerate? Like, you're not going to control permanents or have cards in hand? Like, who cares? Like, why should that be a thing that happens all the time?
Yeah, sometimes you get to feel smart by, I'm going to remove their creature in this specific window to strand the rebound on the ephemerate, but they already got one use out of it, and you're probably down on cards anyway, even if you pull that off. So who's having the last laugh in the end there?
Yeah, and I think it's really the Modern Horizons 2 stuff that's the problem here. Like, when you, like, stuck an Eternal Witness and it survived and you ephemerated it and you're like, now I'm time warping. Like, that was kind of cool. Like, you deserved, like, some applause. And, like, I actually have enjoyed the games with the Ephemerate Reanimate deck where you, like, ephemerate your Archon of Cruelty and everything's horrible for them. Like, that's kind of cool. Or ephemerating Risen Reef. It's just the free stuff.
Yeah, when it's bypassing the cost restriction on a Fury or a Solitude in a whole new way, that's the point where it's kind of like an accomplice to a larger crime there.
Yeah. So, moving along from things we hate to things that might actually cross a line, let's talk about things that we had listed to be the most likely card banned. Mine is Glimpse of Tomorrow, and I just have a very simple question. If you were to take the Tybalt's Trickery deck from February, was that? January? Whatever month that was, that existed for like 5 days, and you just put Glimpse in that deck instead of Trickery, how different is it? And if that's the case, why is one of these cards banned?
I don't think it's all that different. I guess there is one specific answer, which is you're not getting like Eldrazi cast triggers or whatever, so you have to jump through a few more hoops on the front end and the back end, and you are at least doing other stuff, right? I guess we've seen various builds of the Glimpse deck where one of them is Eldrazi and Omniscience and Sarah's Emissary, Archon of Cruelty, whatever, and yeah, that deck is not casting any other spells. It's just trying to glimpse and see what happens. But the more successful lists and the more stable lists, the ones with a bunch of Season Pyromancer, Omnath, Tireless Provisioner, shenanigans, those can at least play something resembling fun and unique game of Magic. Whereas Trickery is a one-trick pony, right? Like this is one thing you get to do, and there is you literally do not get to put any other spells in your deck, with the exception of Simian Spirit Guide, but you have to because of how fast Trickery has made the format, and now you're just hoping to not get reverse 4-outed by your own monkeys, which, I don't know, it has that's like a made for Twitch, made for Twitter style setup, but not healthy in the long term, I would say.
Yeah. So it basically seems like Glimpse is being saved by it also being a functional card, and then people just being bored of playing the Eldrazi stuff and playing the other Glimpse deck if they want that because it's
I think
flashier.
Yeah,
Just
I
kind of
think
funny.
there also are some games where you just suspend Glimpse on 2 and then you work towards that unsuspending, and that feels like a big event, and you don't know exactly what that will amount to versus, yeah, the Footfalls deck is going to suspend Footfalls on 1 a fair amount of the time, but you know exactly what that means when turn 5 comes around.
Yeah, I know when I was first working with Glimpse, I was more interested in suspending it as opposed to cascading into it because it's an easier ask to like generate arbitrary permanence when you can put cheap cards in your deck.
Yeah. Brad's answer I thought was interesting, which is Dragon's Rage Chandler. And this is with the caveat that he doesn't think it will get banned, but he says it's possibly the most powerful card in Modern to come out of MH2. And I think it's hard to argue too much with that. And so in the context of people saying the sky is falling with Ragavan and other people wanting to know if their $100 monkeys or marmosets are actually going to be worth the investment, you can make a case that Channeler is both the problem and also a much easier card to justify axing in the format given its price tag, which officially is not a factor, but unofficially, come on.
Yeah, no, they didn't ban Hazoret. We'll just put it that way. If there's like, it's not a precedent, but like you're showing your hand. I agree that Channeler is probably the most likely to get banned on raw power level, though. Maybe, I don't know. I think that there's also an argument for just Shardless Agent being the most likely, just because at some point they might just get sick of that. But like, even that's like 3 cards. And I think that speaks to the other thing I brought up with, which is like, I think it's really hard to like say you ban anything from this set because it's so hard to unwind the bulk of what this has done. Like, I believe this was a Sam Party thing that he's talked about a lot, but like, name the cards from Modern Horizons 2 that are good that you actually are intending to pay more than 2 mana for. Like, in the top 25 cards in the set, how many do you think you're actually mostly playing for the ability to pay more than 2 mana?
Yeah, so Sam made this point to me actually when I tried poking the bear on Twitter earlier today, suggesting that the healthiest change that maybe you could make to Modern at this point is just to ban Lurrus, or at least make it ineffective as a companion. And Sam's point was, if that happens, I think the first order effect you'll most like to see is just cards that technically cost more than 2 mana, but in reality cost 2 or less mana, right? So it's more Grief, it's more Murtide Region, it's more stuff in that vein, and it's not going to be, this is a thing that lets, Bloodbraid Elf come back into Modern finally.
No, not in the slightest. I will answer the question I posed of how many cards are the top 25. I made a list, and I think I came to 1.
Jeez.
And it's Shardless Agent. The second best card that actually costs more than 2 when you play it is like Imperial Recruiter. It's a very stark difference from how Modern Horizons 1 handled it, where like, yeah, the first 4 or 5 cards are free or 1 mana, but then you hit like Seasoned Pyromancer, Ranger, Captain of Eos, like all these actual cards that people play a lot that are like actually giving you reasons to pay 3 mana. Like, where does Urza fall on the best cards from Modern Horizon 1 or Yawgmoth? Like, you are tapping 4 mana for those. Like, I don't care if Urza refunds you. Like, you have to get the 4 mana to play them.
I think in the context of this question, if you want to hit a Cascade card, maybe Violent Outburst is the way to go, actually, where you could see these hypothetical mythological fair applications for Shardless Agent. And then also, forcing the Cascade decks to play entirely at sorcery speed allows for a lot more counterplay in that regard. So, like, I guess with Grief in the picture, this is less of the case, but in theory, right, your Supreme Verdict could be good against Live Again because they make their board and then you untap and you wrath it away. Or stuff in that vein where, often they pass a turn with 3 mana and you know exactly what it means, and you kind of have to hope and pray that it's one of the other options, whether it's Cycle Waker of Waves or bounce something with Petty Theft or whatever. But you know what it's likely to mean most of the time, and it's just pretty hard to do anything about that. Maybe also you actually grasp the nettle and just fix how these cards work with the Cascade mechanic, right? Where if the intended use of Cascade is, you Bloodbraid Marauder eventually into a good 1-drop, okay, that's fair enough. If it's every single time these cards show up in Constructed, for the most part, it's Violent Outburst into Living End or Crashing Footfalls. Maybe you just, it's the same as the Valky question, right?
I don't think it is, because you've already committed to printing like 6 more of these things under this exact metric. It's a little different to be like, oh, we didn't know this Valky thing would come up like this. It's a one-off thing. And more like, no, we are like looking into Modern. This is a known interaction. It's been known for a decade. And we just went with it. Like, I think that's like a much bigger ask to say, like, we didn't know what we were doing. I think at that point, you might as well ban just all the Alara Reborn ones and leave Shardless Agent in case someone decides to do something fair. Because when you just have 4 of them, you can't just really... It's not going to work out to actually be like, I have 4 Shardless Agents, and I'm going to cascade into Living End with my 4. Like, that's not going to be...
Yeah, maybe if you were actually going to ban a Cascade card, the time to do that would have been in that big wave of bans back in February, where the slate was wiped clean, essentially. And if you had, in the context of Tibot's Trickery and Valky, if you had snuck Violent Outburst into that announcement, I don't think anyone really would have complained.
I think that when you know you're printing Shardless Agent, it's a hard ass to be like, you can't do this, but here you go.
Yeah, maybe that one is a non-starter. There were a fair few answers of nothing to this question, which I think is reasonable. I don't think the format's in a place where one specific thing needs to get banned, but there's maybe a question of there's no imbalance in the sense of one thing is so much better than the rest, but there is clearly an entire class of cards that is so much better than the rest. And if you knock down one of those pillars, the others just get that much better. But I don't think the stuff a full tier beneath it or more gets any more room to breathe and do its thing.
This kind of reminds me of where we were at in Standard after the Oko ban, where, like, you remember playing Theros Beyond Death Standard? Every single deck from that format got banned. But at that point in time, it's the Mr. Burns disease thing. It's just like, there's so many things trying to kill the format at once that it like works out and you just play whichever one you want.
Yeah, this is why I took, on Twitter, I took a sideways approach to this question and suggested just Lurrus, right? Because you have this this group of decks, whether it's Mardu, Rakdos, Grixis, everything under that umbrella, where even if Lurrus didn't exist, you would basically be building your deck in exactly the same way. And so you're just giving people an incentive to do the thing that this new wave of cards already encourages them to do. And then to the extent that they are making choices involving Lurrus, I don't think they're really interesting choices or ones that add much variety to the format. And if anything, it's, okay, my Rakdos deck that maybe has an interest in Seasoned Pyromancer, that's just off the table. There's no way it can possibly compete with Lurrus. And maybe the way to force that tier of, maybe specifically 3-mana cards back into the format is to get rid of the best 3-mana card, even though it now has an extra, cost up front attached to it.
So, would you just play Lurrus as a card in your main deck if you couldn't play it as a companion?
Maybe. And
like, how much worse is Lurrus than Seasoned Pyromancer just as a card?
But if someone's doing that, I'm A-okay with it. I think that's fine. That is not the intended use for the card, but an intended use for the card, and I think it's okay. So yeah, if Lurrus is no longer on the table as a companion, but there's a bunch of Lurrus decks that now have to think about, all right, what happens when I don't draw Lurrus? Or what happens if I draw multiple copies? Is there a way to make that more palatable somehow? That's at least interesting. I can get on board with that. Whereas just having this either completely for free or free in a way that boxes out any meaningful variety or choices, that just seems like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm bringing that up because the way that this has been handled in other formats in the past has been that the actual card Lurrus ends up on the ban list. And I don't know if that's the best
Maybe
outcome.
It's just the whole mechanic needs to go. So I'm sorry, Kahira, but yeah.
I've been here for that since day one. So, I may have led you to this discussion.
It may be that take has just aged better and better over time. So I will cede the floor to you on this one here.
Yeah, companion sucks still. I don't know, like, why? Just why?
Okay, this may illuminate how you think about this, but is it more egregious when it's the Lurrus case or the Yorion case where you just get this overpowered additional thing for free, or if it's, let's say, Gigantha, where it is actually a question for some decks whether you want to play Gigantha in that 15th sideboard slot, but to the extent that that's safe, who cares, right? Like, this is the least interesting choice that you could possibly discuss when building a deck is, do I switch out my Supreme Verdict for a Solar Blaze so that I get access to... I'm already falling asleep here. Like, why are we having this conversation?
I think the Kahira one's the worst, where you're just putting it into your hand to discard a
Well,
Solitude.
Kahira is... It has at least 2 or 3 different ways in which that one can just be completely nonsensical. So the first one is this mishmash of creature types where I'm sure within the deep lore of Ikoria, this all makes a ton of sense. But if I asked you here right now, which I'm not going to do, but just thinking on your feet, could you name all the creature types on Kahira? I have faith in your abilities here. I think most people could get maybe 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I mean, this is cheating because I actually completed my arena set on just from drafting best of 3 of that format. So I do actually know all the tribes, but like it's it's very nonsensical.
So there's that. And so if someone is playing a dedicated elemental deck and that just happens to be one of the tribes that falls under Kahira's remit, does that make Kahira better as a companion in that sense, or worse somehow? Because, oh hey, what if this was Oof tribal instead? Well, there's no companion for that, so why do these guys get singled out for special treatment?
Yeah, I don't know. The mechanic itself is just such a... whatever.
Well, then, with Kahira, there's the added thing of these creatureless control decks that just get to free roll Kahira, and it's not even interesting in that role. It's just a card that they get to have for free. And then, like, the subtle type checking of, like, there's one of the candidates for our Nonsense of the Week initially did not have Kahira until the pilot realized that, oh, Third Dark Guardian is a cat. And so, okay, well, I get to... this is now back on the table, but it's not like I was excited to get to play Kahira and I was paring down my list of eligible creatures to allow me to do that. It almost comes from the other direction. It's you list all the creatures you want to play, and if all of them tick the right boxes, well, hey, I get to play a free Kahira, but no one's coming at it from the other direction.
Yeah, I really don't. Yeah, I think even the early elemental decks had the same issue, right? Where people were like, wait, elemental, it's on the card. Oh, well then.
Right, it is very much, these are the cards you should play with, and these are the cards you should not play with. There's there's really nothing in between there.
Yeah. So I guess I'm ready to move on to the big lasting takeaway section and discuss, kind of how we have felt about this format. And I think it's kind of interesting to see the split of, like, I know Sam... I don't know how much, like, Sam and Brad have played Modern in the last few months versus, like, the people who are actually, like, playing a bunch of the format. So I'm kind of interested, like, but, like, Sam and Brad played so much of the set when they were testing it, and it feels like there's, like, a very different, like, set of answers across everyone who's experiencing the set. And how they're experiencing it. It's very interesting.
It does stand out to me that we are the two people maybe who... I don't know if we play the most Modern, but we at least have to talk about Modern the most, right? In the context of this podcast. And we seem to be the most skeptical, or at least cautious, when it comes to the lasting takeaway here. Whereas everyone else, whether it's Brad and Sam who worked on the set, or Corey who just has his trademark enthusiasm for the set, or Shaheen who has taken a break from yelling at clouds to actually praise the fundamentals of the set. It feels like we're the ones who are the most... cautious in our endorsement here.
I think that some of this has been alleviated literally between the publishing of this article and us recording it, which behind the scenes, that's published on Friday and we're recording this on Sunday. And I think that my huge concern that I kind of voiced is that, like, the Magic Online economy had some real issues as a result of this set. They've been sort of resolved just because the metagame expanded a bit. Not everyone needs a monkey. It's not the worst. It's not great. But I think that, like, I wasn't sure where people would be at for paper Magic. Like, people probably haven't played a Paper Modern tournament in, I don't know, going on 2 years now. Just there wasn't a lot going on at the end of 2019, and then, you know, we've gone into the entire shutdown of everything, and now, like, would people be in for basically buying into Modern again to play? And I think this weekend, like, the Hunter Burton Memorial event fired off in Texas, and all things considered, like, was pretty successful and actually had a top 8. And a lot of, like, the top of the standings have, like, people playing with new cards and not having a ton of issues of access. We'll see, like, if there's, you know, as there's even more of an influx, if there's something that needs to happen there. I don't, you know, oh no, Wizards has to print more Modern Horizons 2. They're so sad. Like, I think it will resolve itself. And also, like, I think the last couple weeks of Burn and Dredge and Tron, which is what I wrote my article about this week, those decks having a resurgence, has given people this idea that, like, you can still play an old deck, even if it's not, like, the literal best thing. Like, you're not embarrassed to do it. Where, like, for a long stretch, it looked really, really
and
bad.
that is a topic that we have queued up for our next episode, is how to succeed in Modern without needing Ragavans and Urza Sagas and having to effectively break the bank again for MH2 cards. And in the context of that, I think that conversation may be very different than it was even a few weeks ago, where Tron was still off the Expedition map entirely, and we hadn't seen Dredge make a brief resurgence, and so on and so forth. So I think you're certainly right about that. And yeah, I mean, there's no, for better or for worse, there is no shortage of people flooding into game stores to play Modern right now. And I think that speaks to the format's lasting appeal, where people really are inclined to give it a chance, even when it's going through a rough patch. And I think right now specifically, we are seeing the payoff of the past 18 months, where it has been really difficult to get anyone energized about Constructed over the pandemic period. Now that things are achieving some semblance of normalcy again, I think there will be people who, whatever they think about the current state of Modern, are just so relieved to be playing Modern again, to be playing Paper Magic, to be seeing their friends, and so on, that that could certainly subsidize the format through, you know, if it ends up going through a rough period, that may see it through it.
Yeah, I think that the product being offered is of high enough quality that, like, one of the things that, you know, has been talked about is that, you know, as much as demand for paper and constructed Magic dropped over the last 18 months, there's likely to be an overabundance of it when, you know, things finally open back up. And I think that the fact that Modern is offering a product that, like, approximates what people expect of Modern and, like, is actually pretty fun and exciting is a huge plus. And I think will really overcome any hurdles the format has, aside from, like, literally, like, I don't know, my thoughts have literally changed from, like, I don't know if people will want in it to, like, will people be able to even find the things? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, as players get back to paper play, there will be a lot of paper nonsense of the week. And we'll take a short break here and come back with, for now, some more online nonsense of the week.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Okay, let's close this out with the segment that we have no qualms about, no doubts about. It is, of course, nonsense of the week. And for the past few weeks, it's been a tough season. You know, our crops have been barren. We've really had to work hard to get through it. But now, you animals are just going off. There has been so much to choose between this week.
Yeah. We can talk a bit about this, CFT SOC deck a bit more. You know, it was in the challenge results, but brought back is pretty awesome. I don't have like a lot to say about brought back kind of usurping Ren and 6. It kind of weirdly plays the same role of like fixing your weirdo mana.
Yeah, and specifically that jump from turn 2, you brought back either 2 fetch lands or like a flag zones and a ghost quarter or some pair of cards like that. Untapping on turn 3 with 4 mana is a form of acceleration that you can get in other ways in Modern, but either there's a substantial cost involved or it's fairly risky. This gets you there in a way that doesn't open you up to like removal or really to any other normal form of interaction, and then you have the freedom to just go hog wild. And so the way that CFT SOC has chosen to do that, this is a 4-color Saheeli Rai Felidar Guardian deck featuring brought back, and then at the top end, the stuff that we're ramping into, we have Omnath and also Showdown of the Skulls, which I think is a really fascinating card in this context. So that long game engine of Showdown with brought back, you just get to tear through your deck and you have this grindy inevitability. But then Showdown in a deck with Teferi, for example, like sometimes one of your 4 cards is a Teferi, you do a bunch of stuff on your next turn, and that turn ends with balancing the Showdown, and you're ready to go again on the following turn. And then in a deck that has Chalice of the Void as one of its main forms of interaction, sometimes Showdown is just like a ingenious myth for Chalice of the Void, effectively. Or you have Solitude and Fury in this deck sideboard as well. And so when you have these free spells, which Showdown pitches to both of those, that is the way that you get to justify spending 4 mana to, draw cards effectively without impacting the board. You get to now find the thing that does impact the board. And this is actually a fairly reliable way of finding that once you have at least 4 copies.
Yeah, I kind of love the Showdown like loop stuff. Like a lot of these things that are occurring with Showdown in this deck are things that have been banned out of other formats that we just haven't had a chance to see. Like Felidar plus Showdown was, Felidar's always been banned, right? In Pioneer, basically. And Teferi has been like gone from Pioneer and Historic. There was like a 5-day window where you could play Teferi with Showdown and Pioneer, but like that was also the same 5-day window that like Balustrade Spy was still legal. Like that's not real. And like Omnath never overlapped with Showdown and Standard. So like this is all a bunch of stuff that like should have existed before, but like is just existing for the first time now, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, and with Omnath in particular, drawback means on turn 3, you're playing Omnath and then playing a fetch land in your deck, which, because you have brought back, naturally wants a ton of fetch lands to begin with, and then you can train into a Showdown or Hardcast Solitude, Hardcast Fury, or there's got to be some stuff you can do with like Saheeli making a new Omnath and then resetting your landfall triggers so you get to go again. Like there's a lot of wonky interactions there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the resetting the landfall thing because you can play Omnath, play a fetch land, crack it, get that. Like, if you replace an old Omnath, you can then get back the other Omnath and your land, and that triggers the 3rd on the first one, then you get 2 triggers on the second. Yeah, you're going way off. That's pretty cool.
And the Felidar Guardian, I guess you got to this already, but you can either make the Omnath or the land, and then, so a lot of wonky stuff going on here. I do wonder if the Saheeli Felidar Guardian stuff is the right package to be pairing with this. From what I can gather, CFT Sock's reasoning was once you have this like Showdown Omnath stuff, that sets you up well for the grindy fights, but you do actually need a way to shut the door against faster decks or to have a thing to dig for with your Showdowns that does win the game and not just generate this incremental value over and over again.
Yeah, I wish this deck had something better to Saheeli for value.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like if you could -2 Saheeli to like draw a card in some way, that would be kind of nice. But I don't think there's a card that kind of does that in Modern for the rates you're looking
Yeah,
for.
the other big thing here is there's not really a good place to deposit counters from Showdown of the Skulls once you get to the second and third chapters. So there was a similar deck that was just Boros, and this had Brought and Ephemerate. It may have even be a Yorion deck, but don't quote me on that. And so this had a much heavier creature focus, like Imperial Recruiter and Ranger Captain, I think, in this list. And so in that deck, you have Brought and Ephemerate both doubling down on the Solitude and Fury stuff, but also, sometimes you get to Brought a Ranger Captain of Eos, right? Like, that's kind of a cute interaction. Or Ephemerate it, if that's your jam instead. Same thing with Imperial Recruiter. And so that can chain you into, like, Recruiter gets Feather Dark Guardian, that gets you Kiki Jiki, and you can win that way. Or, so a bunch of stuff you can set up there while also having an existing board to load up with counters on your showdown turn.
I think that you are overrating the need for a good place to put the showdown counters as opposed to just
anywhere. Even Imperial Recruiter itself, right? You turn that thing from a 1/1 into a 3/3 or a 4/4, and that's a meaningful difference.
Yeah, I think I'm fine putting counters on even a Felidar Guardian, just hammering away with like a 6/10 or whatever it becomes. That's not right. 6/9? I don't know. Math. It's big.
Math is hard. Bigger numbers, better numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Gift Storm, which in the context of current Modern may very well sound like nonsense, but that's not the Gift Storm we're talking about here. We are talking about Possibility Storm, with Gift Storm given as a way to, I think, set this up, although I'm not seeing a package that actually... Okay. So we have Possibility Storm. We have Endless One as our thing to pair with it, and we'll circle back to that in a second. And then we have Noxious Survival and Mission Briefing. So in theory, given enough time and enough turns, there is a pile you can put together which gets you both of those pieces.
Yeah. It took me a minute to go through the motions as well, but I think it's 2 turns after, right? Because you EOT gifts, they give you Revival and Briefing. You revival back half of the combo, and then you can Briefing the Revival for the other half of the combo?
Yes, so 11 mana and 3 draw steps, 3 turns later, we've we finally got our Rube Goldberg machine going. But this core condition actually is quite adorable, I think, because you see Possibility Storm, and so this is 3 red, and whenever you cast a spell, you exile it, and then you flip cards until you hit something with that shares a card type with it, and you get to play that instead. And so the gimmick here is, in a mostly creatureless deck, if you have a creature that costs 0, you can play it immediately and flip an Emrakul, and you get the cast trigger on that, and then you just get to untap and attack with that, and usually lock up the game. And so you might think, well, why Endless One as opposed to, Memnite, Ornithopter, or, hey, Stonecore Serpent, right? That seems like a straight upgrade to Endless One here. Walking Ballista might have some applications sometimes, Hangabout Walker. And the thing is that all of those are artifacts. And so if you want to have other artifacts in your deck, whether it's these engineered explosives we have in the main deck, or we got some, I was going to say we have some Chalice of the Void. We have exactly 1 Chalice of the Void in the sideboard to pair with our 3 Tolaria West, which can find the Endless One. So, it's all coming together there. So Endless One has the virtue of, because it was in Battle for Zendikar, it is devoid and is colorless, but only has 1 card type still. So we have finally found a use for the devoid mechanic here and for the whole contrived Eldrazi setup.
No, this card doesn't have the devoid mechanic. It's just colorless. The devoid mechanic is still useless.
Okay, well, we'll maybe find a use for that some other time. Antoine, if you're out there, get those Wasteland Stranglers out and impress us all once again. But yeah, always up for some Possibility Storm nonsense. I would kind of like to see almost some other backdoor combos in here somehow. So this deck could be Temur, and maybe you get to flip Renasex into a Ugin or something, or the actual most beautiful, I will say, version of this deck was the Pioneer one, where it was Possibility Storm and 16 or so adventure cards. And so you would cast Heart's Desire, flip that into Enter the Infinite, draw your deck, and then convert into a kill from that way. You could put back Thassa's Oracle as the 1 card and then cast your Stone Cold Servant to flip that one over. So that was quite a deck building feat, to be sure.
Yeah, that deck was wonky. Wasn't that like the deck that you had one enter the infinite, and if you drew it, you instantly lost? Or
Oh yeah,
combo?
but that's part of the fun.
That's a strange definition of fun, but I do think that the other deck we have lined up is extremely fun. And this was actually tweeted at us in advance of the league result being posted. And this is Reanimator.
You said it couldn't be done, Ari, and yet here it is, gloriously in the hands of Guru in the 5-0 decklist dump. So this is Amulet of Vigor, Primeval Titan, Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Seen this all before, whatever. But when we get to the spells here, 4 Summoners Pact, 2 Bone Shards, so the first sign that something is amiss, and then 4 Persist, 4 Unmarked Grave. So I actually almost admire the statement being made here that we don't need a backup reanimation target, right? We are a Primeval Titan deck, and that's going to be good enough most of the time, at least in game 1. We can mix it up a bit once we get to the sideboard.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of this is that, like, the Reanimator decks have always had this question of, like, well, what if you draw your card? It's like, well, I'm just going to cast it because it's a Primeval Titan. Duh.
Or what if I don't draw my Unmarked Grave? Well, I'm on the draw, and I play a bounce land, and so I have 8 cards in my hand, and so I just get to... it's free real estate. I don't need to play any, Underworld Codebooks or whatever. Although, you could interest me in that in a deck that has 4 copies of Urza Saga, and if you're bouncing lands back to your hand, then you're going to have some discard fodder. So we can maybe look at finding a copy of that in here.
Yeah. Well, you could just make this an...
Could we, though?
I'm not even going to... See, I'm not even going to say that you could make another thing in here. You actually need all the lands for the amulet half of the deck. Now, I do think there is a noticeable loss to losing Castle Garenbrig, but, it's pretty cool. So
hey, we could play 1 copy of Asmota Talaria Westfall.
I had not considered that. That is some extremely large brain maneuvers.
I enjoy people finding these increasingly obscure and nonsensical uses for Talaria West, because you think, all right, well, that card can find my engineered explosives or the Academy ruins to pair with my explosives. Like, that was the joke back in the day. And now you get to go just completely off the rails with it.
For some reason, it didn't register until like 10 seconds after that you would actually like have discarded a card, so you could go
wow.
1 blue Talaria West, immediately cast Asmore.
Because see, that angle, not even... Okay, jeez. Huh. I think we broke it.
You just get to pay 4 mana.
Easy. So on that note, unless you have anything else, I think that is the perfect way to close out Nonsense of the Week, and also just our Nonsense of the Week as well.
Yeah. I don't have a lot that can top the Graveyard or Hand Titan.
Okay, well, you can find us in all the usual places. We will be back with a hopefully more sensible episode this time next week. Take care, everyone.